Would you raise your hand if you were at one of my other presentations 4 months ago when I brought a similar slideshow and we got a little deep into things like, you know, the way that corporations control the world, the way that organized crime runs in the world. Yeah. So we're going to go a little bit into that kind of stuff tonight, but the Diddy thing, everyone's talked about the Diddy thing. Everyone's had something to say about it. And you can't help but notice that a lot of people are scared to look at where it might lead and look at where it might come from and look at what might be actually behind it. And I think that that is where the Diddy thing really is people like to say, oh, Diddy's just celebrities. Epstein is the real deal. And yeah, we'll talk about Epstein next week. Come on back. But by the end of this presentation, I think you might agree with me that Diddy is not only the real deal, but Diddy is also the disclosure deal because they can't control this one. And the reason why we're talking about it is because this is the one that is going to break everything wide open and change the world that we live in. This is the one that's going to change our culture. It's going to change our children. It's going to change our future. So, killing us softly, mind control, and the music industry. If you are not familiar with the current state of the music industry, let me introduce you to some of the top stars in our modern music industry. Starting from the right, you have Katy Perry, who used to sing at church. That is her dancing on a pole with flames. You know, I tried to choose pictures where they're wearing clothes. Lil Nas X in the chair started with the country, quote, country hit Old Town Road. Again, I chose not to show the photo where literally the devil is banging him in the ass. We have two of Lady Gaga, both in red and in white. Couldn't decide which one was worse. Standing over top of the youth's favorite, Billie Eilish, I guess bleeding black from the eyeballs. Then we have Sam Smith, who we'll talk about again when we talk about the top hits of last year, dressed literally as the devil at the Grammys in 2023. And finishing it off on the left, we have Miley Cyrus with blood pouring out of her mouth. Thank you, child stars. These are the people that are performing for our children, that are in music videos for our children, that are being idolized by our children. These are not like rare photos that you have to hunt down on the internet. These are from their normal performances, their mainstream appearances on live TV, on YouTube, uncensored, exactly as this is. But when I talk about Jeffrey Epstein, my channel gets taken down. So there's something going on. And we're going to start at the Grammys because the Grammys last year in 2023 set off a wild reaction from the media. Naturally, when the Grammys features cages and fire, a transsexual person in the cage singing about sex and about all sorts of stuff, naturally people called it satanic because Satan is on the stage in costume. And the reaction from the left was that the Christian right is having a meltdown over the satanic Grammys. On the left here, you have Sam Smith, who is the headliner on this song that we're going to talk about later. He's dressed as the devil for the performance. You also have Kim Petras, who we'll talk about in a second here, who is famous for being the most successful transsexual person in the music industry. That's the one in the cage. These are some headlines from mainstream news articles decrying this satanic panic. Conspiracies have seen a resurgence in the past decade. And to clarify, these are clips from an article directly referencing this Grammy performance. So when these are photos from the performance that we're commenting on with this news article, and they're saying satanic panic conspiracies, I don't know what about it is a conspiracy because it's on the stage at the Grammys, you know, the largest musical award ceremony in our country. Satanic panic has also seeped into mainstream Christian nationalism in the US. The movement deems any cultural or political institutions that don't reflect evangelical Christian values as satanic or antichrist. This includes everything from school kids learning about LGBTQ issues to vaccines to drag queens. But remember, this is an article about those Grammys doing their whole distraction thing. I was not raised Christian, you know. This is not like my natural state of affairs. I'm not naturally out here talking about Satanism. But Satan is on the stage, so these are some more photos from that same performance. And in the second clip there, you'll notice earlier in the evening on Sunday, Smith and Petras also won the award for Best Pop Duo. Petras, who accepted the award, made Grammy history by becoming the first transgender woman to win an award. Yes, if you're reading the screen, the Grammys were sponsored by Pfizer. Naturally, the actual real humans on the internet, on places like Twitter, had a different opinion of like, yo, I know we on the right probably use the word satanic too often, but this performance from Sam Smith is literally a tribute to Satan. So let's talk about Kim Petras. Kim Petras, whatever. This is from her tour called Feed the Beast. Yep. Literally, the tour is called Feed the Beast. These are actual photos from her performing on stage, coming out of some fiery gates of, I can't imagine where. You're going to be spared the song because I don't want to deal with the audio stuff. But this is Kim performing. This is a clip from YouTube. It's Kim performing one of their most famous songs, where the lyrics are literally "sex me how you wanna, sex me how you like, sex me in the morning," da 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 da, little musical interlude, and then the chorus is sex 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 I wanna, and then it repeats with another phrase like "you make me" or something like that. So, just to be clear, that is the rising pop star, the greatest pop duo in 2023, as awarded by our American media institution, right? This early life section is taken straight from Wikipedia. Petras was born in Cologne, North Rhine-Westphalia, so in Germany. Her mother was a dancer, her father is an architect. In 2006, Petras, then aged 13, appeared on a German television current affairs show in which she discussed her medical gender transition. At age 14, she appeared in a documentary and a talk show in a push to get permission for early sex reassignment surgery. At age 16, before the minimum age of 18 in Germany. So, maybe the whole world just loves Kim Petras. Or maybe there are people promoting this stuff, and there are people selecting what songs we're hearing, selecting who gets stage time, selecting who comes into fame, and who gets Grammys. Okay? So let's talk about the top songs of 2023, because I think it's important to paint a picture of just where exactly are we at in American culture today before we talk about how we got here. So we will rewind and talk about the 60s, and the CIA and MKUltra. But first, let's get a picture of just where are we at. Because I'd imagine that, like me, most of you don't listen to the top hits because it's trash. And I know about the top hits because I'm like, you know, I'm in this generation and I hear them and I know about them. But I've not seen the music videos before. I've not actually done the looked at what exactly is happening here, because these are videos, all of these top hit songs, when you go to YouTube, these videos have 20 million, 30 million, 80 million views, right? So I decided to go watch them, and I decided to rate them. And I naively said, oh, hey, Morgan Wallen, he's country, right? So we'll give him a pass. Don't worry, we'll come back to him. I gave all of the country artists a pass because I figured those are probably good messages. They're country music. They're probably God-loving and like pro-family or whatever. I don't know. We'll come back to them. But let's start with Miley Cyrus and Flowers. The whole music video is basically her dancing in lingerie, talking about how she doesn't need a man and it's okay to be alone and no problem, I'll buy myself flowers. And I know, like, people on the internet, probably not people in this room, but people on the internet, I know I'm kind of ragging on your musical artist, maybe not Miley Cyrus, but I'm going to get to your people soon. And it's kind of a downer, and I'm being a little harsh. I understand that creative people have always made songs about the hardships of life and about how hard love is and about how hard relationships. I get it. I have made some music myself. But Kill Bill, number 3 by SZA. starts with a man shooting his wife in a straight up shootout. There's like a bunch of people that shoot out, like kill his wife. And then basically the whole song is about how you would stay with such a person because, quote, while she's holding a heart here on the side, rather be in hell than alone. Taylor Swift, anti-hero, it's a little lighter, but it's basically all about how you can't choose anyone good, and that's just how you are, and everyone will betray you, and that's okay because Taylor Swift is like that, so it's okay for you to be like that. Number 5, Creepin' by The Weeknd, is all about how he's pretty sure that the girl he's with is cheating on him all the time with, I can only imagine what this visual that's in the music video is portraying. But that's fine. I'd rather not know about it. I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm doing. I skipped over number 6 because actually, surprisingly, Selena Gomez, who's a child star from Hollywood, actually was wearing her clothes for the whole song and the whole music video. She's wearing regular clothes for the most part, and it wasn't overtly like sexual or like it wasn't obviously atrocious. So I said, cool, free pass, Selena, nice work. Number 7 though, Die For You, is kind of interesting. It's by The Weeknd, and it's literally a whole music video of this guy as a child. It's like clearly The Weeknd portrayed as a child escaping from a CIA mind control facility where he's being trained to use psychic powers like crush the can while it's floating, and then he escapes from the mind control facility, and then the mind control people hunt him down at this house, and then he kills them all with his mind control powers, and then he finds this red cross and elevates into the heavens at the end of the music video, which maybe it's not a bad, like maybe the lyrics aren't bad, but it's a kind of weird video. So we skipped over number 8. Number 9, Back to SZA. This is literally like, this is literally basically just a whole bunch of softcore porn scenes with a whole bunch of different men in rapid succession, and it's clearly with a bunch of different men over and over and over, and they return to all the same like over and over and over. One of those, yes, that is her giving a lap dance to a robot. The other one is literally a naked person eating French fries off of her back with ketchup there. And there's no substance to the song. No substance to the music. It is literally just that, the whole song. Number 10, I'm Good, Blue by David Guetta. It's about partying and having the best effing night of your life. And it's all about girls wearing this and taking drugs and going. And I love going to music festivals. I've done lots of that myself. I understand, guys on the internet. I understand that it's fun to go and live your best life. But think about what this is telling our kids to do. And when you overlay that over I'm Blue, Dabu Dee Dabu Die from the 90s, which is basically a song about depression, just kind of think about what's going on here. So here's Unholy. This is the one that we were talking about at the Grammys with Sam Smith and Kim Petras. And this song is literally, so the opening scene of this music video is a regular white husband kissing his regular white wife goodbye from their regular home where it's clearly an idyllic like American family. And then he gets in his car and he goes to this body shop, which is not an accidental play on words where, you would work on your car, but clearly there's a second play on words there. He goes into the back and it's basically a gigantic party where you literally do not know who's a man and who's a woman because everyone is just dressed like that. And it's basically just a giant sex party. And it's very graphic. I chose some of the less graphic parts of the music video to put on here. This is on YouTube with like millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of views. Spray painted on the car is cheat and the French word for shit. And the whole song is about leaving your wife to go and have parties like this and how that's great. And this was the song that won them the best pop duo of 2023. So when I went through the whole list, it kind of turned out like that. And I actually went back and was like, I should probably check on Morgan Wallen. And I realized that Late Last Night by Morgan Wallen is all about getting so drunk that, America, bro. So I went back through and kind of rethought some of the country songs and I tried to be lenient. Like I actually gave Harry Styles a pass for As It Was because it's not overtly sexual and it's not overtly about drugs. So I was like, cool, let's give us some wins. So that is the state of the Billboard Top 100 last year. And these are the artists that make the songs. And this is the stuff that your kids are watching on YouTube with no censor. And these are the things that are being played on the radio with no filter. And these are the people that are being idolized and telling you who to vote for. Yes, these are the people that told you to vote for Kamala Harris. So how did we get here? We're going to go all the way back to 1953. In 1953, the CIA started a secret mind control program called MKUltra, and it's very famous. The objective was to study the use of drugs, trauma, hypnotherapy, and other things to understand how you might control the mind of a human being. And at the time, it was explained as like the Soviets are doing this, so we have to do this too. Or rather, at the time, it wasn't explained because it was secret and it was not happening. But later, that was the explanation. And, maybe that's true, but we won't really ever know. And this is very important to point out at the start. People skip over this every time. In 1973, Richard Helms, then the director of the CIA, issued an order to destroy all documents related to MKUltra. And they didn't destroy them all. There are documents that are online that you can find. There's actually quite a few documents, but we don't have any idea how many were destroyed. We have no idea what programs they managed to keep from us. We have no idea what programs actually did that they destroyed the evidence of. So just keep that in mind as we go through what we do know about, right? Because their goal was to learn how to control people's minds. And then, coincidentally, in the 1970s, when everyone was really pissed off about the CIA because they'd kind of gotten caught doing some really bad things, and there was all this rumbling about hearings and disclosure and an investigation, that was when Richard Helms was like, maybe we should destroy all these documents about all the things we just did because it looks pretty bad. And they did. And of course, they halted MKUltra in 1973 and they never reopened it. And they would never do that again, ever. Because duh. So trust me, bro. MKUltra was from 1953 to 1973, and then it stopped, and we never did mind control experiments on humans again. We never used any of the information that we understood. We never used any of these drugs ever again, okay? So when we get to Kanye West later and Harley Pasternak, just remember that it's all just a coincidence because they threw it all away. So, MKUltra famously involved the use of LSD, very powerful psychedelic drug, administered to all sorts of people that were not aware they were being given it, namely people in mental institutions, people in hospitals, their own staff. They were giving it to their own officers. One guy jumped out of a window because he didn't know that he was on a mega dose of LSD. It's kind of a complex story. We don't really know how it went. There are allegations that are not confirmed that the CIA actually dosed an entire town in France with LSD without telling them. And at first, it was blamed on moldy bread that was being sold at the bakery. And then 20 years later, 40 years later, an investigative journalist went back and was like, wait a minute. That does not make sense. And the CIA was kind of doing this thing. And then you guys had that thing happen. And 1 + 1 usually equals 2. So this is what I mean is we don't really know the extent of what was done because so much was destroyed, so much was covered up. And what they told us is so horrendous that you can only imagine, it's not like they destroyed the PG stuff and then gave us the rated R stuff, right? They destroyed the rated R stuff and they gave us the PG stuff. And the PG stuff is pretty wild. And it's not just LSD, by the way. It's also drugs like scopolamine, which is famous in Colombia for hookers in Colombia like to use this drug that comes from the Duranganga plant where you blow it in someone's face and then they kind of become like a walking drunk zombie that you can convince to withdraw all your money from the bank and move out of your apartment and sign over your deed to them because you're kind of very impressionable. It sort of is an urban legend, but it's I've talked to Colombians that have stories and the CIA was looking into it because it'd be pretty useful if Jeffrey Epstein could have his hands on a drug like that. Just don't talk about that on TikTok because they'll take your video down real quick. Operation Midnight Climax was where the CIA actually opened a brothel and made a special room with two-way mirrors and cameras where they would dose Johns before sex workers did things with them. And it's easy to pass over this and think that's wild, holy crap, next. But realize sex is the way that you access some of the deepest part of the human psyche. And we're in a world that is ravaged by sex trafficking. And we know that sexual abuse does incredibly horrible things to the mind. And the CIA's goal was to learn mind control. And so when they're giving people drugs, pairing that with sexual experiments, think through what that means they were doing, right? Because it's not like they were trying to do a half-assed job at it. They were trying to succeed. right? So if you can imagine what you might do in order to succeed at that goal, I bet they're better at it, right? This is a quote from one of the people that was involved in the brothel. Now I'm going to give you, here, let me read it from here. His boss said, now I'm going to give you another assignment. We want you to test these mind-bending drugs. I said, why the hell do you want to test mind-bending drugs? He said, have you ever heard of the Manchurian Candidate? I know about the Manchurian Candidate. In fact, I read the book. Well, White said, that's why we have to test these drugs, to find out if they can be used to brainwash people. He says, if we can find out just how good this stuff works, you'll be doing a great deal for your country. If you're not familiar, the Manchurian Candidate is the concept that you could brainwash someone into being a mind-controlled assassin, where you implant a trigger into their mind, and then when they hear the music play the song, like in a Hollywood movie, and then they're like, now I will kill JFK, right? So it's been embellished a lot. It's been Hollywoodized a lot. But that was their goal. Thankfully, they never succeeded. Thankfully, they don't have that technology. But Project Monarch, this is where you get into sort of like not theoretical, but alleged programs that maybe they destroyed the documents. But we have whistleblowers today that talk. We have hundreds of whistleblowers today, to be clear, that talk on the internet openly about how they are the victims of child sexual abuse programs run by the CIA that are specifically designed to give people dissociative identity disorder, so that way you can split someone's personality through sexual abuse and torture as a child, so that they have multiple personalities and you can implant certain things into different personalities. And the CIA learned a long time ago that someone with dissociative identity disorder is really useful for political assassinations, for all sorts of types of things, because one identity does not even know the other identities exist, and you can implant triggers that make people switch between identities. And that's not like conspiracy theory mumbo jumbo. That's like straight out of the DSM. That is how dissociative identity works. Usually it's much more messy than that. But our great CIA spent millions of dollars researching how to hone the craft of giving people dissociative identity disorder, allegedly. So, now let's put it on the ground and talk about what this means. Because this was all happening during the Vietnam War era. And you might remember, too, before we get too far into this, any of you who are familiar with your, 70s and 60s lore, you would remember that actually LSD came out of a CIA lab. Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters, allegedly Ken Kesey was in a program where he stole it from the CIA lab where they were testing it on people, and then he conveniently released it to the hippies, and then it got loose, right? I'm sure it was an accident. Because the Vietnam War was tremendously unpopular. And when we all think about Vietnam War protesters, we probably think about hippies. But before acid and the hippie generation, actually the Vietnam War era was full of very buttoned up, competent, cogent protests. It was full of civil rights activists. Some of the first Vietnam War protesters were Quakers in mass, organized movements. My dad is actually one of those Quakers. And there was a very powerful and organized anti-Vietnam War protest movement happening all across America, right? And it was a thing that the U.S. had never seen before, because the country had grown in ways that were new. People had gotten information in ways that were new. Video was starting to live broadcast these atrocities to our nation. And so naturally something had to be done. And if you're not familiar with this book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, in 2014, David McGowan published this book, which pointed out a striking body of evidence that the intelligence world had a ton of direct ties to all of the founders of the hippie movement and of the acid rock era of music. And so here's the part where if you're a really big fan of the Byrds or Frank Zappa, sorry, I just report the news. I don't write the book. Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison's dad was Admiral George Stephen Morrison. He was the man in charge of the boat that starred in the Gulf of Tonkin incident that sparked the Vietnam War. You know, the one that allegedly got fired on, but actually they didn't get fired on. It was all made up. That was Jim Morrison's dad in charge of that boat. This is a photo of Jim and his dad on the hull of a boat. I'm not sure if it's the same exact boat, And this is a quote from Jim Morris. And I think these days, especially in the States, you have to be a politician or an assassin or something to be really a superstar. So the Lizard King has an interesting history. And I'm just going to give you a few examples, but there are dozens of them in this book. They go on and on and on. Frank Zappa. His dad, Francis Zappa, was a chemical warfare specialist assigned to Edgewood Arsenal near Baltimore, Maryland. And Edgewood Arsenal has a long history of links to MKUltra specifically because it was the home of America's chemical warfare program. You know, things like LSD and other drugs. Kind of weird. There's an entire Wikipedia page about Edgewood Arsenal human experiments. Somehow that dude's son just happens to move to Laurel Canyon and help start the hippie movement of music. Stephen Stills of Buffalo Springsteen and Crosby, Stills and Nash. He made a hit single titled Bluebird, which just so happens to be the original code name for MKUltra before they changed the name. He grew up all across Central America, where his dad was spreading democracy. It's not really clear if you're not familiar with the euphemism. They basically have a family history that looks exactly like what you would expect a CIA operative traveling around during that era doing CIA work would look like. And actually I have an excerpt from the book here that I want to read to you in order to kind of drive it home. Because I'm leaving out so many details and so many examples that I want to give you an example of just how detailed. It's not just that. So it's like in each of these examples, there is this much more and then some. But then there's also like, you know, in just this book, 20, 30 more examples with this much detail. So there is, however, an even more curious aspect to Stephen Stills' story. Stephen will later tell anyone who will sit and listen that he had served time for Uncle Sam in the jungles of Vietnam. These tales will be universally dismissed by chroniclers of the era as nothing more than drug-induced delusions. Such a thing couldn't possibly be true. It will be claimed that since Stills arrived on the Laurel Canyon scene at the very time that the first uniformed troops began shipping out, and he remained in the public eye thereafter, and it will, of course, be quite true that Stephen Stills could not have served with uniformed ground troops in Vietnam, but what will be ignored is the undeniable fact that the U.S. had thousands of, quote, advisors, which is to say CIA and Special Forces operatives, active in the country for a good many years before the arrival of the first official ground troops. What will also be ignored is that given his background, his age, and the timeline of events, Stephen Stills not only could indeed have seen action in Vietnam, he would seem to have been a prime candidate for such an assignment, after which, of course, he could rather quickly become, stop me if you've heard this one before, an icon of the peace generation. And he says it that way because we're already, in that book, we're already through like 5 different people that have had a very similar background. If you're not familiar with the secret war in Laos and the special forces that were in Vietnam in advance of the official ground troops, that's a whole other dig. John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas, he co-organized the Monterey Pop Festival. He penned the song San Francisco, Be Sure to Wear Flowers in Your Hair, you know, the one you've heard a million times. His father was a Marine Corps captain, and his mother worked for the Pentagon. His sister also worked for the Pentagon. There's a million connections there. His mother claimed to have psychic powers her whole life, and she was a direct descendant of U.S. President John Adams. A little excerpt about John Phillips. John Phillips, of course, though surrounded throughout his life by military and intelligence personnel, did not involve himself in such matters, or so we are to believe. Before succeeding in his musical career, however, John did seem to find himself quite innocently, of course, in some rather unusual places. One such place was Havana, Cuba, where Phillips arrived at the very height of the Cuban Revolution. For the record, Phillips had claimed that he went to Havana as nothing more than a concerned private citizen, with the intention of, you're going to love this one, fighting for Castro. Because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of folks in those days traveled abroad to thwart CIA operations before taking up residence in Laurel Canyon and joining the hippie generation. During the 2 weeks or so that the Cuban Missile Crisis played out a few years after Castro took power, Phillips found himself cooling his heels in Jacksonville, Florida, alongside the Mayport Naval Station. How strange. So what is this Laurel Canyon that we keep on talking about? If you're not familiar with LA, this is the northern half of LA. This is sort of Hollywood Hills. The Hollywood sign is sort of like the top right of this map. And over on the left, in the center of the map, you can see a gold star, which is Frank Zappa's famous log cabin. It was the house that was like the party center of the hippie music origin story in Laurel Canyon. And it got passed around to a few different owners, and it's extremely famous in this time. It's worth noting that there was no music scene here before. All these guys just happened to move to Laurel Canyon, some random road above LA, and they just happened to start the musical revolution of the hippie movement right there. And they all came from all these from Cuba and from, Air Force bases and from all these weird places. For some reason, they just showed up here at this log cabin where the star is, and they started making music together. And it just so happened to be right next to, on the red dot there, this really bizarre Lookout Mountain laboratory, which now is owned by Jared Leto, which is a whole other rabbit hole. So Lookout Mountain Air Force Base is the gold star, and the log cabin is the blue star. So like right up the hill from where all of these guys just decided to start the hippie era of rock and roll, there's this secret Air Force base that like you really can't make this up. It was known as the Lookout Mountain Air Force Station, but what it was officially was a film studio. It was where they filmed all of the not filmed, obviously, because they weren't setting off nukes there, because clearly. Certainly not where they filmed the moon landing, because it had a full, allegedly, it has a full, multiple different sets and stages. It has sound rooms. It has editing studios. It has everything you would need in order to film a feature film. It's a little small in the text here. There's a personnel section there you can read through. They had many famous directors and actors. Steven Spielberg worked here for a time, coming through here doing classified work for the military. Allegedly, it was just so they could edit together the nuclear test footage to give the nuclear test footage to the people. That's all they were doing there, allegedly. But this secret military base with this secret agenda to give us public videos of nuclear tests just happened to be right there up the hill. Let's put two and two together. If you're not familiar with Charles Manson is one of the most notorious crime scenes in American history. Charles Manson came on the scene through the whole hippie generation, and he was kind of a nobody that was trying to make it in the hippie rock scene. And he made a lot of friends. He traveled around. And then he went on this really weird rampage that got penned as the Helter Skelter narrative, where he basically had this cult, the family, of mostly women and a couple other men that was this giant orgy intermarital group where all these runaways and random girls were all sleeping with and having children with this short little Jesus dude that looked like he looks, and somehow he's convincing all of these runaway young girls to have his children, just kind of on a crime spree with him. And then they all of a sudden snuck into a house where a bunch of celebrities lived and committed one of the most brutal murders that America has ever seen. And I won't describe it too much, but we're talking stabbed 80 times. We're talking blood smeared on the walls, painting with their blood, kitchen utensils used. And one of the women, Sharon Tate, was pregnant at the time. And it absolutely shocked America. And it took the entire nation by storm, and everyone was focused on it. And for a long time, it went unsolved. And when it finally did get solved, it was solved by this man named Vincent Bugliosi, and he made a ton of money off of litigating the trial. I guess it wasn't solved by him, it was solved by the LAPD, and he was the lawyer that kind of litigated and put Charles Manson in jail, and then wrote a really great book about it and made a whole bunch of money. And for the longest time, that was the narrative about Charles Manson, is that he's just this crazy guy that hated black people, that was trying to start a race war between blacks and whites in America. And he did carve a swastika into his head. And he did convince these girls to carve X's into their heads somehow too. But the theory was that he had them under this spell, and he had ordered them all to go and commit these grave murders, because he wasn't actually there those nights. And that happened it happened in 1969. So it kind of closed the hippie generation, right? Acid came on the scenes in the late 50s. The 60s was this crazy decade of love and all this partying. And if you think about it, if we kind of put two and two together, okay, there's these protesters. How do we stop these protesters? Quick, give them acid. That'll turn them, that'll distract them, right? Let's start this whole crazy generation of it's not about the war, it's about flower power and peace and love, bro. No big deal. And that, actually, they didn't realize. So if you don't know about psychedelics, Psychedelics do very different things in a CIA laboratory when you're being tortured or like interrogated or than they do when you're out in nature with your buddies playing music, right? And so the CIA has been doing all these tests on all these psychedelics. This is me speculating. And they're like, these drugs totally mess with people's minds. Then somehow those drugs get out into the public and all the hippies are like peace and love and like flower power, but they're like hanging out making music and stuff's not necessarily going the way the CIA would have wanted if this had been their, if they'd been behind it. And so how do you put a lid on that? Well, it wouldn't hurt to get like a notorious flower power hippie kind of a guy to commit one of the craziest mass murders, drug-induced mass murders that the country has ever seen, to publicize it all across America and to make everyone afraid of hippies. And now hippies are like the most toxic thing you could ever see, right? So in some ways, this book and this book bookend this whole era of very suspicious activity in the music industry. And for the longest time, Charles Manson was just this crazy weirdo lunatic. And then this dude, Tom O'Neill, came along and he started investigating it for the newspaper he was working at. And one thing led to another. And he realized that, wait, that's a lie. And that's a lie. And that's a lie. And eventually it turned into a book about 15 years later. And he discovered that Charles Manson had federal protection quite clearly. Charles Manson was on parole and he would get pulled over with guns. He would commit crimes. He would leave the state that he was supposed to be in and he would just get let free every time. And then he started looking into the girls that were with Charles Manson and they had been, most of them were runaways or they'd had run-ins with the law or they'd gotten out of prison and they had dealt with the justice system normally until they had met Charles Manson. And then the moment that they met Charles Manson, suddenly they had protection and they were getting let out after committing crimes, let out after violating their parole over and over and over. And then they started committing murders and they, shall we say, didn't really get investigated. And federal people started to get in between investigations and separate investigations and try to do everything they could to stop things from linking up. Then he started finding people that looked an awful lot like CIA officers interfering with the investigation or something. He never arrived at a clear picture because it happened so long ago, but he certainly arrived at the picture that the narrative that America was fed for the longest time about Charles Manson is almost certainly bogus, because what almost certainly actually was happening is that Charles Manson had something to do with the CIA and the FBI. And he looked an awful lot like a COINTELPRO agent, the kind of person that you would use to infiltrate a movement, to divide a movement, to spy on a movement perhaps. Somehow he has these abilities to convince all these young women to basically join this commune, have his babies, carve axes into their heads, and commit murder. These are like regular girls. They're not like psychopaths before they met him. And now they're committing some of the most gruesome murders that the world has ever seen. And so when I look at that, this is my speculation, to me that looks an awful lot like MKUltra. To me that looks an awful lot like an MKUltra experiment or program. Whether he's the product of one or the literal agent of one, I don't know. But that's what it looks like to me. If you haven't read Chaos by Tom O'Neill, it's wild, and I highly recommend it. And I bring up this whole era of music because often the present day is a little convoluted, and it's a little hard to reflect on what's happening right now because everyone's speculating and everyone's got interests involved and there's monetary interest and people are covering it up and it's all. But when you look backwards in time and you look at the history of what's already happened, you can start to get a clearer picture of how things work. And then you can apply that to what's happening today because the CIA has not gone anywhere. They are still very much up to their old tricks. And although they put away the MKUltra stuff and they would never do it again, maybe, just maybe, they have new programs. So remember, culture is a powerful weapon, and I'm sure we all know that. And it's a powerful weapon that the CIA very much is aware of and has actively tried to use. And that's not speculation. They say that in their documents all across the decades. So now back to Diddy and today. The mainstream media stories about Diddy like to focus on 1,000 bottles of baby oil and on like, ah ha ha, all the rappers are gay and it's so funny. Yeah, it's funny. But there is a way deeper story here that we are being distracted from that, many, and I'm not the only one. There are many of us online that are trying to scream from the rooftops as loud as we can that this is not about the baby oil. This is way bigger. It's not just about Diddy being a corrupt gay freak. This lawsuit that kind of sparked the big onslaught of disclosure was Rodney Jones versus Sean Combs. Sean Combs is Diddy. There was the Cassie lawsuit before that, and there were other lawsuits before that, but this is the one that really sparked everything. And in the original lawsuit, Jones v. Combs, it originally named Lucian Grange, who is the CEO of Universal Music Group. It also named Universal Music Group directly as two of the co-defendants. It named a whole bunch of co-defendants and basically alleged that they were running a giant racketeering organization that was transporting girls for sex, guns, drugs, drugging people without their knowledge, hosting parties for not guns, but drugs and sex, committing murder and getting away with it. They had federal protection. We'll get into this in a second. And the big one was that it looked an awful lot like sexual blackmail stuff. Don't want to miss that Universal Music Group is in charge of Taylor Swift. Taylor is sort of like Lucian Grange's like superstar. You can find lots of photos of them like, I love you. You just made me so many millions of dollars all over Google. She's his favorite. There's a wild rabbit hole where Ice Spice, Taylor Swift's like new random twerking friend, she is the star of Lucian's son. And she's helping make Lucian's son career. And suddenly, for some reason, Taylor and her have this weird like, oh, we're best friends. But 33 out of last year's top 100 songs were produced by Universal Music Group. So 33 of the songs of that list that we went through earlier, we only went through like the top 12 or whatever. 1/3 of last year's top songs was produced by this company. So Jones's lawsuit included a lot of evidence, photographic and video, that gay sex was being used as blackmail in the rap industry. He alleges that he was shown gay sex videos by like famous musicians. There are screenshots from it on the right there. That's Stevie J. There's parties with underage girls at them. Those are screenshots there of them in the red. They're drugging girls and minors without their knowledge. There's drugs, guns, murder, all sorts of stuff in this lawsuit. To be clear, it's not been litigated yet. It's not proven. It's allegedly. But they allege, which is like when lawyers allege in a deposition like this, when they allege these things, they are legally bound to have reason to believe that the evidence that they're presenting is real. So lawyers can't just make up fake lawsuits and pretend they have evidence that they just don't. So when the lawyers bring this suit and say, we have thousands of photos, we have hundreds of hours of videos, they do have that. There's this whole other wild rabbit hole that we don't have time to go into, but this guy named Jonathan Audie went and shot up a Trump hotel in 2018 before anyone knew about Diddy, and he was just this crazy guy. And then in this interview he gave before he went to jail, he said that he was a Diddy sex slave and Diddy was paying him to have sex with Diddy's girlfriend while Diddy watched, which is exactly what Diddy did with his sex slaves. Before anyone knew. And in that same interview, he claims that he would overhear Diddy talking on the phone all the time during these sex sessions, and that he knew that the rap industry was using the private jets of the super popular rappers like Drake to fly drugs all around our country. So clearly that's just made up hocus pocus. But it also alleges in this lawsuit that Diddy had federal protection. It alleges that kind of directly, as in his staff were ordered to call his head of security, Fahim Muhammad, if they ever got in trouble with the law, if they got pulled over with drugs. And it also shows evidence of a shooting as one example where LAPD showed up to investigate a shooting and they clearly were like, oh, I didn't see anything. Looks like a drive-by. Peace. Fahim Muhammad also just so happens to have been Michael Jackson's head of security when he died. Fahim Muhammad is a really interesting character. You can't see it, but in the bottom here, so the top is Fahim's photo from the lawsuit we're talking about right now. The bottom is the exact same photo from his Penn State alumni page, where it says, it's talking about this real estate company, Oasis, that he co-founded, which we'll get to in a second. But in 2008, Fahim graduated from Sacramento State University with a Bachelor of Science degree in business administration with a concentration in real estate and marketing. And he's the head of security for Diddy's blackmail ring. Business marketing and real estate? Real estate and marketing? And if you're the head of security for a sexual blackmail ring where there's minors getting drugged and there's guns and drug, like, think about what your job really is, right? You got to know what's all going on. You got to keep it going on. But then, one thing kind of like it clicked of like, wait a minute, he graduated in 2008. What year did Michael Jackson die? 2009? 2010? 2009, right? So how did this dude become the head of security for the king of pop the year after he got his business and real estate degree? Right? And that's like, you can just go and watch the hearings on YouTube. He's on the stand at the Michael Jackson hearings talking about how he was second on the scene. How when he showed up into the room, Michael Jackson was dead. The doctor was at his side trying to resuscitate him. He walks into the room. He's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea this had just happened. And then the kids walked in and he had to get the kids out to protect, right? Kind of weird. He's like probably 24 at the time. And then, of course, you fail to protect the king of pop. He dies mysteriously on your watch. So naturally, then you get a job running the most notorious sexual blackmail ring in all of California, right? By the way, he also is really into real estate, right? He has this company called Oasis. He just happens to own hundreds of acres of land directly on the border of Mexico. And there's actually a video online from the local news station, Channel 8, that you can find where they went there to interview him because there's this funny story that surfaced where he gifted 40 acres of this land to his 13-year-old son for his birthday. And I bet that he was doing it for some like weird tax thing or money laundering thing or something. I bet he thought nothing of it. But then the local news was like, oh, that's such a cute story. Let's go report on it. And they show up with cameras, and Fahim Muhammad and his kids and his crew have to be in their property talking about how much they love the open air. And they're like, yeah, I like riding quads out here and stuff. It's so cool. And the border wall is right there in the camera shot. And if you've not been to the border, FYI, that means that human smuggling is happening in your property, which is like so fun to ride quads around. Well, like the coyotes are dropping kids over the wall. Right? It's so weird, huh? It's funny. And they're like pretending like they spend time out there for fun and camp and stuff. It's like, I don't think so, 13-year-old. But that would be pretty convenient if you were running a sexual blackmail ring where you needed like kids to kind of sometimes get dropped over the border wall that no one knew existed. The sexual blackmail side, there were hidden cameras. This lawsuit is the only place where you've heard about these hidden cameras so far, but there's a lot of rumors in the industry about Diddy filming things. And in this lawsuit, they directly allege that while living and traveling with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones discovered that Mr. Combs has hidden cameras in every room of his homes. It describes how he would accumulate video blackmail on everyone at these sex parties, powerful people, record executives, politicians, whoever shows up, you know? And I hate to say it, but this sounds a lot like the mob, right? And if you weren't here for my talks last time, there's a whole lot of backstory there, but the quick version is the Jewish mob and the Italian mafia way back during Prohibition, when they were making a ton of money off of selling illegal liquor. That was when they went from like little street gangs to being like the largest organized crime groups in the world. They were like, shit, how do we launder all of this money we're making? And they naturally turned to businesses where it's really easy to kind of fudge the numbers, right? And the Jewish mob particularly, like they were already in certain industries and the Italian mafia were already in other industries. And so naturally you turn to the industries that you're already in. And the Jewish mob was already in Hollywood and the music industry because Jewish people had a long history. They literally founded Hollywood because they got kicked out of New York because the New York people were like, no Jews allowed. So they moved and founded Hollywood. So the music industry was an obvious place where like, hey, you're Jewish and I'm Jewish and I got all this money. Do you want to help me like make a movie that costs way more than it costs? And same with the music industry. There's a long history of black people and Jewish people kind of like cohabitating the music industry where the Jewish people are the executives and the black people are the artists. And that's like ancient history. And it's really easy to sell like 1 million albums for like a little more than you might actually have made. And suddenly all that money is cleaned, right? And during that time, they discovered that the director of the FBI, the guy who founded the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, was gay. And he really liked doing stuff with his second in command, Clive Tolson. And they got a photo of him doing it. And then they went to Jay and they were like, yo, you're not going to investigate us anymore because we've got this. And then they started to throw parties in this blue suite at this hotel called the Plaza Hotel, where they were basically hosting parties for a whole bunch of freaky stuff to happen in these private suites where there just so happened to be cameras. So the mob and J. Edgar Hoover could get blackmail on everybody. And then we went through, 30 to 40 years of mysteriously the FBI not prosecuting the mafia and the mob. Then we also have Jeffrey Epstein, who is very much tied to Israel. running another video sexual blackmail ring. So, when it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's probably the mob knowing how sexual blackmail is really, really useful. And the music industry has had the mob in it for a very long time. And suddenly we find a sexual blackmail ring in the music industry. And I hate to say it, but all of the record executives at the top of the music industry right now are very powerful Jewish men, right? And a lot of them have some pretty sketchy ties. The guy on the right, Clive Davis, we're not going to go into all of them, but Clive is a great one to talk about for a second because he's the guy that first taught Diddy how great it feels to do the gay stuff. He picked Diddy out when he was like 21 or something. He was like an intern at the music label. And he was like, yo, let me show you this other side of life. And then 3 years later, Diddy winds up with his own record label and all this funding. And this sexual blackmail ring is born. Clive Davis goes all the way back to like he was the manager for Janis Joplin, the Grateful Dead. Like he's way back. He's been in the music industry running things for decades, right? Now Lucien Grange is in charge of Universal Music Group, running people like Taylor Swift, like Sam Smith, the devil at the Grammys. So, and Liar Cohen is a whole other can of worms. That's where you get to Jay-Z. So, not only do we have evidence of a sexual blackmail ring, kind of somewhat mob related in the music industry, but we also have whistleblowers from within the music industry saying that the Jewish record executives are taking advantage of them. More data points that there's something fishy going on within. And again, I'm not saying that all Jewish people are evil sexual blackmailers. I'm saying that the mob likes to blackmail people. And we have evidence that they're there doing it to this day. Because speaking of Kanye West, if you're not familiar with Harley Pasternak and the whole story of Kanye West was a little unhinged. And he started saying things that people didn't like. And he got called an anti-Semite and all sorts of other things. But he was talking about his experience within the record industry and the way he was being treated in his special Kanye way. And at one point, it got to this kind of like fervor pitch. This was before he like disappeared for a couple months, then came back looking different, and then married the woman that has her tits out all the time and started running a porn company. This is before that Kanye West came on the scene. Back then, it was that Kanye West, and he published this text that came from his personal trainer. Like, the guy that's supposed to help you exercise to get in shape. That's the kind of job that Harley has. Harley Pasternak, his personal trainer, texted him, quote, "I'm going to help you one of a couple ways. First, you and I sit down and have a loving and open conversation, but you don't use cuss words, and everything that is discussed is based in fact and not some crazy stuff that dumb friend of yours told you or you saw in a tweet. Second option, I have you institutionalized again, they medicate the crap out of you, and you go back to zombie land forever. Playdate with the kids just won't be the same." And if you haven't been following along, playdates with the kids aren't the same for Kanye anymore because he disappeared for a little while and then he came back and he was really weird all of a sudden. That's kind of a weird thing for a personal trainer to text to his client, right? You can find an interview, and they've tried to scrub it pretty well, but you can find an interview with Harley Pasternak where the interviewer asked him, "What did you do before you were a personal trainer?" And he says that he worked for the Canadian Special Forces. And they asked, "What did you do for the Canadian Special Force?" And he says, "We tested drugs." He's like, "Oh, like, what do you mean?" It's like, drugs you've never heard of. That's like more or less what he said. That was his job before he became a personal trainer to the stars. Because now Harley Pasternak is a trainer to the stars. And in case you're not clear, so this is all from Harley Pasternak's website today. You can log on right now on your phone and go look. And I'm just going to give you a quick rundown here. I see Ellen Page, although it's Elliot Page now. Don't dead name. Amy Schumer. I see Bono, Common, Eliza Dushkin, Jason Sudeikis, Hilary Duff, Jack Black, Jane Fonda, Frank Ocean, Jimmy Fallon, our favorite, John Mayer, Jonah Hill, Kesha, Lady Gaga. Okay, Lady Gaga. Mac Miller, who committed suicide. And this is not all of them. This is only 6 pages of it. This one guy is the personal trainer to all of those stars. And he sends text messages like that. And he has a history, apparently, of working with drugs you've never heard of for the Canadian military, Special Forces. So, remember, MKUltra, desire to mind control, the understanding that the music industry has vast power over our culture and our kids. And now today's modern music industry has sexual blackmail rings, has exactly what you might think if there was some weird MKUltra stuff going on. It has texts that sound an awful lot like MKUltra, and then people that ignore those texts kind of get MKUltra'd. If you've seen what happened to Britney Spears, for example, those are the ones that they don't just, accidentally drop off a building or give pneumonia to. Speaking of pneumonia, I didn't actually put a slide about this. Oh, no, I do have a slide about Kim's lost words later. Yeah. So, blackmail is rampant, and it appears to have ties to intelligence agencies. It does not look like Diddy wired all of his own homes up with his own sexual blackmail ring just so that he could have a freak off. That is not what it looks like to me. There's satanic and degenerate themes all throughout the music industry. It's not just one performer. It's not just one performance. It's pervasive. Gangster culture has decimated black neighborhoods and promoted crime, drug. Like, if you didn't grow up, like my generation, we grew up with the rise of gangster rap, and I lost so many friends to drugs like oxycodone, to drugs like cough syrup, right? Rampant, because all of the music is about doing all of these drugs. There's a whole rabbit hole about the prison industry making money off of keeping their cells full and using their inmates to work as slave labor. Companies like McDonald's use that slave labor, and they don't pay for it. Party and drug culture has normalized dangerous drugs and promiscuity and binge drinking. And I know, sorry, internet, I know that we all love to have fun out there. Yes, I have been to festivals and stuff, but you have to at a certain point think through what's the difference between having a good time and actually destroying your life and promoting a culture that destroys our country. Because drug overdoses have skyrocketed. The yellow line, the yellow words in the left-hand graphic, the yellow words with the line, that's when fentanyl kind of hit the scenes. Two-parent homes are at all-time lows. The graph on the right is the number of single parents in the U.S. over time. Mental health is in crisis among young people. On the left, the blue line is anxiety. The yellow line is depression. But it's worth noting that bipolar is up 57% since 2010. Anorexia is up 100% since 2010. Schizophrenia is up 67% since 2010. And transgenderism is skyrocketing in a way that can only mean social contagion. The graph on the right. And I included my source because people really freak out when you say the words social contagion and transgenderism in the same sentence. But I come from the generation when anorexia was the social contagion. And if you're not familiar with what a social contagion is, it is just the very basic principle that if a thing is genetic, it doesn't increase at a rapid pace because genetics pass from parent to child, parent to child, parent to child. So then maybe it's a disease that you catch through the air, which transgenderism obviously is not, right? So all you're left with is maybe it's poisons in the food, chemicals, endocrine disruptors. That's a bad word right now. But it is interesting that transgender people correct the problem of their gender dysphoria by taking hormones. So clearly hormones have an effect on your gender expression and identity, right? And so if there are chemicals in our food and water that disrupt our hormones, maybe that would have something to do with it. But there's another aspect where anorexia in my generation from the 90s and the 2000s was a social contagion, and that when celebrities are doing it, young people, especially young women, and the stats are way higher for young trans women than young trans boys, young people are very impressionable, and they will take on the identity of their celebrities and make it their own. And that's when you get a graph like this. It's not an accident, because these people aren't getting there by skill. Diddy sucks at making music, but he's really good at doing other things. Sam Smith is a lot of things, but a superstar with a ton of talent, maybe not. But he gets described as like brave and like sexy and like all these crazy descriptors in the media because these people are being selected. These people are being placed there. The media is not reporting on to you what songs we chose to listen to the most. They're reporting to you what songs they chose to play the most. And then they're reporting to you what people they chose to give awards to. And then they're telling you which people they chose to put on stage at the show and how they chose to dress them and how they chose to promote them and how they chose to market them to our children. This is not genuine. This is not real. This is not our culture. This is their culture that they're giving to our children, and they're tricking our children and a lot of us into thinking it is cool. But change is coming. This is where I said that Diddy is the stone that breaks the whole bridge. And there's a couple different pieces of that. First and foremost, the lawsuits that are already out there in the public domain are likely enough to break it wide open. And they have not been litigated yet. They're currently being litigated. Diddy got arrested. He is currently in federal jail or prison, and he's awaiting trial for the stuff we already know about. And they have put together what is a racketeering charge that started small, and it's not charging the big dogs yet, but it looks like it's built in a way so that they can add defendants as they go, and they can take down more people with them as they add to that case. But there's way more than that coming down the pipe. The guy on the right there, Tony Bugsby, he's a very high-power lawyer that's very serious and very credentialed. And he came out earlier this year saying that he's representing 120 defendants that all have their own unique allegations against Diddy with their own evidence. And he uses very spicy language like big people are going down, like CEOs of giant corporations, like famous politicians and celebrities are going down, and we have them dead to rights. He says there's videos. He says he's not messing around. He says it's coming. The guy on the left is a whole other fascinating can of worms. This book hit Amazon earlier this year, and it is allegedly a book written by Diddy's ex-wife about how evil he was and about what he was really doing, and she sent it away in a dead drop to a trusted friend to be published if anything ever happened to her. It also alleges in this book that she stole a bunch of his blackmail videos and secreted those away with the file so that he could never hurt her, because he had trapped her in his orbit and was abusing her and wouldn't let her leave, and she had realized that the only way to get out was to get blackmail on him. And allegedly she did that, saved it away on a secret hard drive, and then she got pneumonia and died. And on the very last page, allegedly her words, says, "I just called the ambulance. I think he got me. If this is it, I love you, my child." And when this book got published, it was very controversial, and it still is. It got taken down from Amazon. And when you look it up online, it's like, this is all fake. Her kids came out and said it's all fake. And maybe it is. It might be. But then the guy who was in charge of publishing it, the guy on the left there, came out and did an interview about the process of how he got the information, why he published it how he did, and allegedly he has the dossier, the file with the videos, and allegedly it's all coming out. And these are people that have reputations. It's not like he's some nobody random dude. He has a whole career behind him that's, rather substantial. And so we're looking at a place where the Epstein files, they were blackmailing people that were so high caliber that you could only get them to let loose on a private island, in a private building with the richest, most trusted people. And so that was a set of blackmail tapes that was centralized, and there was only one set. And when they took Epstein down, they took that set of tapes and then they lost it, conveniently. That is not what Diddy is. Diddy was happening in downtown LA, downtown Miami, downtown New York. It was happening at parties full of celebrities. It was messy as hell. Everyone was there. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew what was happening. It was an open secret. They kind of are all open secrets. People have been sending the videos around. 50 Cent has alleged that Diddy used to send him videos to brag about how cool his parties were. Like, 50 Cent loves to troll Diddy, and 50 Cent might be just as dirty as Diddy, who knows? But like, it's the kind of thing where this stuff is already dispersed before these people bring it out, before the victims come forward, before Kim allegedly releases tapes, or the prosecutors that are on the Combs, thing release their tapes. Sean Combs said that he has his own. Or not, sorry, not Sean Combs. Lil Rod said that he has his own tape. So there's this is layers and layers and layers of mess that they cannot clean up. And that's awfully inconvenient, because just about everyone that told you to vote for Kamala Harris has been partying with Diddy. And also a lot of people that didn't tell you to vote for Kamala Harris too. Like, let's not beat around the bush. Everyone went to Diddy parties. And just because you went to a Diddy party doesn't mean you were at the Diddy party. But at a certain point, some of them look pretty suspicious. Some of them were pretty close to a certain Pizzagate related scandal. Some of them seem like they have something to hide. And I have a feeling that Diddy is just the beginning, not only of people in the rap industry that have been doing similar or the same things that are going to come out and go down, but also celebrities, politicians, sports stars, you name it. One of my favorite quotes ever from Ryan Dawson is, "A lie must be told 1,000 times to be believed, but the truth only once." And the truth is already out, and there's nothing they can do about it. And we're going to keep talking about it, and we're going to keep asking about it and exposing it, and there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. So, yes, it's dark. Yes, our culture is really messed up. Yes, what is happening to children around this country and around the world is tragic. But shining the light on it, exposing it, is how we stop it. And it was happening all along, even though we didn't know it. So it sucks to learn about, it sucks to see it, it sucks to talk about it, but that's how we stop it, right? And it is about to stop, or at least it's about to be dealt with, and the world is going to become a better place. So, pray for the kids, pray for their families, pray for the country, and we got this. Thank you. This is a good question. The question is, do I think that they switched out Kanye West for a different person? And I don't know. I think it's entirely possible that they took Kanye away, they drugged him out of his mind, that had an effect on his like appearance in terms of how puffy he is, how he looks, and he came back just blech. Maybe. I also entertain the idea that, like, you know, we've been cloning things for a long time. And like, have we been cloning things for 30 years? Maybe. Have we been cloning things for long enough to have some adult clones at this point? I don't know. The tinfoil hat can come back for conspiracy theory trivia night. I wouldn't put it out of the question. I personally am of the mind to believe that it's most likely that they just MKUltra'd the original Kanye. But once you start to look at all the other people that seem to look a little different, once you look into the fact that the CIA has had skin masks that are good enough to fool the president of the United States and the Secret Service all the way back in George H.W. Bush's presidency, you can watch a TED Talk about that one by the woman that did it. Then you realize, like, oh, maybe they don't even need a clone in order to switch a person out. Because the mask, like the Mission Impossible mask, where you go, and you're a different person, they were good enough 40 years ago to fool people in person. So who knows? I know he's acting rather fishy.
Hey, Ian, George Webb.
I thought I recognized you. Thanks for coming, George.
Yeah.
You're a legend, man. Good to have you.
Huge fan of you, and your research is amazing. I just love. There was one gal who said, you know, you're a Nazi because you were talking about the Jewish mob, and I retweeted that, and that got like 25 million. That was one of your biggest retweets. It was awesome. But what I was really super impressed, because I consider myself kind of a researcher, is your research boards that you showed everybody, and just how hard you work. And I said, there's a guy who works as hard as I do. Yeah, even more. I mean, you're incredible. But anyway, on this great presentation here, do you think this stuff comes out right before an election to shake down Hollywood? You know, they're like, hey, we got the goods on you. Either you come out with 10 million for Kamala right now, or there's going to be a price to pay.
Great question, George. Actually, I hadn't really considered it that way specifically before. As in, I had thought a lot about how maybe this stuff comes out right before an election in order to expose the corruption in the Democratic Party, and how this sexual blackmail cabal, which is really the human trafficking industry, that's really the black markets. It's their expression of exerting power across the front markets of our world, right? Because the human traffickers are friends with the drug traffickers, are friends with the weapons traffickers, etc. And so the way that they exert their force upon the regular part of our world that we all live in is through these blackmail rings, through these extortions. And I had always thought of it sort of as like, let's expose that right before the election so that we can win. But that's a good point, is that actually it would offer very powerful like bribery, essentially, to say, you could pay us to not release this before the election, otherwise it's going up. I'm of the mind that in order, like the strength of character it takes to go up against this level of evil, to take the risk to your family and your personal safety in order to whistleblow on this, to come out against this, I think that takes the type of people that are not doing it strictly for bribes and for money and extortion. I think that might be the naivete in me, a little bit. But I think that we're up against such evil and so much power that inherently the people that are putting themselves on the line, that are in these lawsuits, that are speaking up, I want to believe that they're truly doing it for the right reasons. And I'm going to go off of that until I'm shown evidence otherwise, rather than assuming that they're just as corrupt as everyone else, because it's just a better life if I look at it that way.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Zach Roller. I've been watching you for probably a couple years now. Great work, by the way.
Thank you.
So my question is, have you ever heard of elite gender inversion? It's kind of like the transgenderism, but for the elite, where they do it at such a young age with top-of-the-line medicine, pharmaceutical drugs, and basically it's intertwined with a bunch of Satanism. So kind of like Lady Gaga being a man. I think I've even heard like Ariana Grande, stuff like that.
I have not heard of it, but I wouldn't be surprised. I'm kind of tangential to that. I am of the belief that we're in an era now where we are getting pop stars, porn stars, and celebrities that were created for their roles, right? Because it's been, 40, 50 years since MKUltra, right? And MKUltra produced all of these broken young people that they were doing experiments on, probably, allegedly, maybe, who knows? And I can only imagine who is staffing the porn industry right now, who is staffing these blackmail rings and staffing our celebrity culture right now, that they will do these things and act these ways. And we have an awful lot of people that look like that one looks just like that one. So I don't know what exactly they're doing, but I suspect they're doing something rather fishy, and they have a really weird obsession with transgenderism. So, yeah.
Do you think it's a coincidence that Operation Paperclip brought Nazi scientists into the United States after World War II, and the MKUltra program started in the early 50s?
No, we actually know that that's not a coincidence, because there's actually a book called Operation Paperclip written by Annie Jacobson, which I left at home tonight. But she went through a massive amount of the primary source data, and there are primary sources about sort of the squabbling over who's allowed and who's not, and who do we get, and who are the Russians going to take, and how do we get them. And that was about rocket technology, so we could found NASA with Werner von Braun. And it was about chemical warfare, chemical weapons, and psychological weapons like the MKUltra program. So we actually know quite well that MKUltra was tied to the Nazi scientists bringing their experiments over, because we were doing them too during World War II, but they were doing them too. And we wanted all that knowledge for ourselves.
Hi, I'm Lily, and I actually text my question. So there was a movie that was made in 1968 called Wild in the Streets. Have you ever seen?
I have not.
Okay, so that movie, what it was is they were trying to get an individual into Congress at the age of 18, and were trying to bring the voting age down to 15. And eventually what they did is they got in with this congressman, and eventually what they did is anybody who was 40 and over, they put in concentration camps up in Seattle and injected them with LSD. So
Sounds a lot like Seattle.
this came out. So this movie came out though in 1968. It had Hal Holbrook in it, and so it's just when I think of like what happened with the whole COVID and stuff like that, and now more states, for example, Colorado that I came from, the psychedelic mushrooms are legal there. It's becoming more of a fad where there's more of these drugs are becoming legal. Is that part of MKUltra?
I can only give my opinion. I don't think so. I think that the Charles Manson story is sort of anecdotal evidence that they didn't understand what they were unleashing on the world when they did it. And my personal perspective on psychedelics is that they can wreak a tremendous havoc on a person's psyche if used in uncontrolled settings or by people that should not be touching them. But they also can do incredible good for people that have had trauma, like PTSD, soldiers coming back from war, if used in the correct settings, in the correct ways. And that is a very important debate right now that, I mean, obviously I don't have the answer to. But I'm not of the belief that psychedelic drugs are bad. I'm of the belief that the CIA is bad, and that psychedelic drugs are really intensely powerful and dangerous. I would be far more concerned about drugs like cocaine and heroin and all of the sort of like hard drugs of addiction. But when unleashed on a culture in crazy ways, any drug can do crazy things. And I do think that movies sort of do predictive programming and sort of test out ideas on us to see what we think of them, to normalize things, to feed us ideas of what our future might be.
Can you remind us of the website to purchase books from instead of Amazon?
Yeah, bookshop.org. Bookshop.org is a cooperative sort of a business structure that networks local bookstores all around the country into an Amazon replacement for books. And you can log on to bookshop.org and just search for any book, and it'll have them all just like Amazon. It has 1 to 2 day shipping. You pay the same price as Amazon, but it'll ship it from a local bookstore to you. And the money that you pay into bookshop.org gets dispersed either directly to the local bookstore you chose or out in a pool to all of the bookstores collectively. So it takes down Amazon and it supports local bookstores. Yeah, bookshop.org.
What would you say in your research? What's your understanding of the beliefs of the elite?
Great question. I think there are different beliefs among different circles of elite. And I think that a lot of people like to sort of oversimplify the elites in our world as though they were one group. And just like any room, any game, any war, there are competing factions. I think that inherently being in that wealth bracket gives you certain perspectives like, I know better than you because I've seen more than you. I have more money. I'm more successful, so I know better. That's very common. The one, so I could go a million directions, but the one that's worth going on quickly is eugenicism. Eugenics is sort of the classic crutch of scientific thinking, in that when you over scientifically think about how to make the world a better place, inevitably it's easy to think, oh, humans are the problem because we're polluting, we're warlike, we're not great when you have too many of us, right? And so the world would be a better place if we had less of us. And this is a very common theme throughout history. And people like Bill Gates have said it from stages like the TED stage, where if you do well enough with vaccines, maybe we could get that number down by a few billion people, right? And so eugenicist beliefs are pervasive in the elite. And there is a push right now to have us have less babies, to have us be more sterile, to have us have less interactions with each other, and for us to be more single so that there will be less people and that will save the planet. And that is a lie. You should be marrying people that you love, having families with lots of kids that you raise well with good morals, because good people will save the world, not less people that are all sad and depressed and on pharma drugs.
What books were you referencing tonight? Can you do a follow-up post and put them in the follow-up post? Do you get paid for recommending them? And what is your stance now that you're becoming pretty popular with people around the world, with all of the offers and things that are coming towards you for mentioning people's books and things like that and getting paid for all kinds of stuff? How do you deal with all that?
This is a great question. I'm really glad they asked it because I don't talk about this enough. I don't get paid for any of these recommendations. And if I ever am getting paid for a recommendation, I will tell you. That goes for in a live presentation, that goes for an online presentation, that goes for a recorded video. These are just books that I'm reading. These are just books that I ordered. Candace Owens read this one and made it really popular, and I'd seen it before, but it was her recommendation that I went out and bought that from bookshop.org. That's Chaos by Tom O'Neill. This is not sponsored. Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Dave McGowan. Kim's Lost Words, you can't get it anymore. It was on Amazon briefly. Good luck finding it. And this one I have not started yet, but it's Hollywood Babylon, and I'm pretty excited to start. I do not get paid for my promotion of 95% of the products I talk about. When I do get paid for a promotion of something, I clearly disclose that because it's the right thing to do and because it's the lawful thing to do. But I have intentionally built my brand in a way that I want to support small businesses, and corporations can go F themselves. And so I do get a lot of solicitation, but corporations have sort of learned by now that if you send me a solicitation, L'Oreal, I'm probably going to take a screenshot of it and make a whole video about how evil L'Oreal is. So maybe you should just F right off and go solicit someone else. But for example, I made a video the other day about seed oil Scout. this app that finds restaurants where they don't use seed oils, like Old State Saloon. And I was not paid by Seed Oil Scout to do that. I've never talked to the people that run Seed Oil Scout. It's just a useful app. And it also gave me a great opportunity to talk about Old State Saloon. And Old State Saloon is not paying me to be here tonight. I just love Mark, and I love this place and these people. But Mark is helping me live here for really, really, really cheap. So, this is sort of sponsored by Mark because he's the man. So a big shout out to Mark. But that disclaimer goes for all of my recommendations throughout all of my time, throughout all of my videos. If I am getting paid to recommend something, I will tell you. And if I have received it for free, but I'm not getting paid, that's a different, and I will disclose that too. So, because it matters. It matters a lot, especially because a lot of my brand is built on talking about who owns products and what products are what and stuff. So it matters.
Hey, how's it going, man? I've been watching you for a while. You're always like an internet figure that I watch. So it's really cool that you're here in Idaho doing these things in person. I think that's really valuable. My question is if there's a lot of allegedly, right? Like if it's true that CIA had something to do with JFK's assassination, P. Diddy, all these other things, right? Would you say that the CIA has done more harm to the U.S. than positive to the U.S.? Like, what's your take on that?
I was about to scoff and give a funny answer, but it actually deserves a real answer. Because it's really easy in the tinfoil hat world to forget that we do live in a world at war, and we do have real enemies. And Russia and China are two examples that are beautiful countries full of all sorts of individuals just like us that speak other languages, but they are at war with us in certain covert and overt ways at times. And we do know, for example, that the Chinese military has digitally invaded our electrical grid and has essentially hacked our electrical systems and has latent malware, more or less. Like they have latent attacks ready to go in our grid at any time. We probably have the same exact thing in theirs. And so we do live in a dangerous world where it is important to have a covert intelligence agency to protect us from such threats. I understand that. And I don't talk about that enough because I just am always talking about how much the CIA sucks. But it's worth acknowledging. And so thanks for this question. Have they done more harm than good? I think without a doubt. And the reason why I think that is because when you actually, and this is why I talk about the CIA so much, is because you don't learn about it in school on purpose. And most people, the gap in their political understanding largely revolves around their understanding of the CIA. Because if you don't understand covert warfare, then you don't understand information warfare. And if you don't understand information warfare, you don't understand that the Democrats have been lying to you for the last 10 years. A lot of the Republicans have too. All the big money's been lying to you. But the CIA's job has been to lie to you from the very start. And when you look at who founded it, a bunch of corporate lawyers that went and overthrew a whole bunch of governments for their corporate buddies, as well as started all these other really messed up experiments. And then you look at who staffed it all throughout the years and the things that they did, it starts to become more and more clear that though the mission is genuine and admirable and necessary, the people that have been carrying out that mission were corrupt people from the start, and they've been corrupt people all the way through until the current CIA director, he was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. His job before the director of the CIA was at this think tank called the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And Mr. Burns, who had a long life in government, is the ambassador to Russia. He worked in all these different positions. He was very, very connected. And he finished his term in government and needed a job. And he decided that of all of his contacts, Jeffrey Epstein was the guy to go to get a job recommendation to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And he spent a few years there, and then he got selected to be the CIA director by the Biden administration. So William Burns is another example of just one more in a long line of CIA directors that are clearly connected to the wrong people for the wrong reasons. And so we need the mission to be done by someone who's doing it for the right reasons. And we need Doge. Shout out to Elon Musk. Thank you, buddy.
And the price of Doge just went up again. Okay, if Satanism is alive and well in the music industry today, are we living through biblical times?
I'm not great at answering this question because I don't have a Christian background. I'm just learning about Christianity now. And so I don't have the context that Christians have. My answer would be that all times are biblical times because obviously we exist. As far as Satanism and the spiritual battle going on right now, I found Christianity and this community because of the Satanism in the music industry. And I was researching the music industry and said, all these richest people in the world that control all of this sure seem to believe in Satan because they're paying all this money to make everyone dress up as Satan and do satanic things. And so if they're going to take Satan that seriously, I'd better start going and learning about Team God because, duh, you're either on that team or that team. And that one doesn't look very fun. So I don't know if we're living through biblical times, but it seems like the other team thinks we're living through satanic times. So do with that what you will.
Hey, Ian, it's good to hear you talk, man. It's been great to get to know you just from being here. I've discovered who you are. My name's Dan, and I'm local. I just, I grew up in Ag. I grew up in the church. But really coming to grips with a lot of this stuff over the last 15 years has been difficult to relay to other people. And so one of the things that, when we get into it, when we dig deep and really understand these things, the question always comes up as, what is the solution? And you've actually been talking about some of that already, kind of took the wind out of the sails on the question here. You did answer it already somewhat, but
I have another answer for you.
Well, so if I could lay it out a little bit is, when we look at music, I grew up with rap. Man, I was listening to hip hop before gangster rap. It was awesome with Young MC and Tone Loc and stuff. I liked it, and I was into that stuff. My friends were into that stuff. But with music, what is it? Have you studied frequency and what it means to us as people? And what really is the solution with, as we look at when they're coming out full-blown Satanism, what do you see as a real solution to what we face with this evil?
I'm going to give you two answers to this. One is frequencies. Yes. There's both auditory frequencies and light frequencies. And I have a better reference for light frequencies than auditory frequencies because I've been on it more recently. Go and watch the Danny Jones podcast with Dr. Jack Cruz. It's available on YouTube and Spotify. Danny Jones podcast, great guy, with Dr. Jack Cruz. And he talks all about how the blue light that's being emitted from our screens is designed by the CIA in association with the MKUltra programs to mess with our dopamine systems through the light interference in our own genetic, the way that we are built, because we are built to be beings like the light affects every cell in our body. And he very clearly lays out, he's a neurosurgeon, he's quite smart, and he lays out quite clearly how blue light coming out of screens is designed to mess with our dopamine systems so that our motivational systems are messed up, so that we're easy to lead around by whatever your vice of choice is. And when you look around at America today and you look around at the prevalence of screens and the prevalence of vices, it starts to make a lot of sense. The other side of that is, how do we get away from the Satanism in music? And if you think about it, music is programming us through frequencies, yes, but also just through messages, right? And I'm going to give the religious and the non-religious answer here because the answer is quite clear. If you're being programmed with bad messages into your mind, you can counter that by programming your own mind with good messages. And to me, that sounds an awful lot like prayer and studying the Bible. That sounds an awful lot like what I did before I had found religion of any sort, was motivational speakers. When I was busy blaming my whole life on other people and trying to be the victim for all my problems, it was listening to motivational speakers all day long that got me into stop thinking that way and start thinking this way. Because when you're listening to a message over and over and over in your head, your inner voice doesn't have any time to think about all those other things because it's busy listening to the words of, you are a good person, you can do better things, you can work your hardest, you have value, whatever it is, right? So if you're out there and your mind is stuck on the wrong loop, whether it's depression or whether it's vice or whether it's apathy or anxiety, think about the words that your head is saying to you and think about how you can develop a habit of prayer or of meditation or of whatever it is that gets your head thinking positive thoughts about you and the world and everything else.
Blake B. from Georgia is asking, what search engine do you use for the majority of your searches online?
This is a great question. It's a common question. I actually use Google a lot. And part of that is because I want my searches to be replicable by my audience. And so if I do a search and I find this article, I want my audience to be able to find the exact same article as me, because I don't want to like be finding some like esoteric, invisible information that no one else can double check. I want to be finding stuff with the most mainstream possible source I can and showing us that it's right in front of our faces. Because if it's right in front of our faces, reported by their own propaganda, it's pretty easy for us to see what's going on. I do sometimes go away from Google. I use Brave browser as my standard browser, and Brave search is pretty good, but it also is very limited in what it is clearly more limited in terms of what it is actually combing through, especially in the image search. A lot of people say DuckDuckGo. In my experience, DuckDuckGo is just as controlled as Google, and you're lying to yourself if you think that you're like some genius who discovered DuckDuckGo. Sorry, guys. Yandex is for like autistic people that are super smart and can read really small text. I can't do Yandex. I'm not that smart. There are other search engines, and I do recommend people to experiment with them. But my goal is not to be the smartest crayon in the box. My goal is to be the crayon that everyone else can relate to so they can get involved in learning things for themselves.
Thank you for being here, Ian. I have a question about just the last couple of years. I feels like people since maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago have kind of gone through this awakening. Like we were kind of asleep, and then there's this awakening to not just the music industry, but like health or politics or all of this CIA stuff. So what do you think is driving this awakening?
Great question. A lie needs to be told 1,000 times, the truth only once. And the more times you tell a lie, the worse life gets. The more overt the lie, the more you are oppressed, the more naturally the human spirit rises out of that. I'm a strong believer, like there's a lot of conflicts, certain conflicts in the Middle East, for example, where you have an oppressed people that are being oppressed and oppressed and oppressed and trying to be killed and killed and killed, and they'll just never die because the human spirit is tremendously powerful. And the more you oppress someone, the more you make someone downtrodden, the more powerful their rebellious spirit is. And so I think that the world has been getting worse and worse and worse, and that these elites, these powerful people, have been pushing down on us harder and harder and harder, and it's been more and more in our face. And that naturally leads to the arising of good. It's sort of like yin and yang. You cannot have enough darkness until light naturally emerges out of it. And I like to believe that we're at a time of emerging light, because the world has gotten so dark that we all cannot help but notice how messed up it all is. And so I think that it's not any one specific thing, though many would point to COVID, many would point to human trafficking, some would point to Israel and Gaza, whatever it is that woke you up. I think that it's all of it together is waking everybody up.
If you had to point a finger at one individual person who was the instigator of the Jewish mob, who would you point at?
Nice and easy questions. The instigator of the Jewish mob. In the modern world, I mean, there's no real good answer. Like, you're obviously not going to know. You could point at the Rothschilds in a big way. But I mean, you could point at like Meyer Lansky, the actual the guy that turned the Jewish mob into the mob. But I think a more interesting answer is to point at the Emanuel family. I wish I had some slides for it. We'll talk about them another time. The Emanuel family, there's 3 brothers. Their father, you're going to have to trust me on this. You can Wikipedia all of this. It's very public information. There's this guy, and he is in the militia forces that are founding Israel, and he bombs a whole bunch of civilians and is in one of these paramilitary organizations. And then they found Israel, and they get labeled terrorists, and they're forced to disband. And he has 3 kids. And Israel is the one that labels them terrorists because they were doing such atrocious things that Israel is like, that's a bad look, guys. We know you helped found us, but, let's change it up. He has 3 kids, and his kids are Ari, Ram, and Ezekiel. Ari Emanuel owns the UFC, as well as a whole bunch of other sporting and media and celebrity organizations, including modeling that worked with Jeffrey Epstein. Ram was in the Obama White House. Their brother was on Biden's COVID task force. And these 3 men were all raised by this dude who was a literal Zionist terrorist, who Israel had to call them terrorists because they were so atrocious, because they were killing civilians. And so those brothers have these very prominent power positions in our world today, and no one's really looking at them and no one's really talking about them. So it's not really like a who's the founder of the Jewish mob answer, but it's an answer of like, that's a weird one we should probably be looking at. Sorry, Joe Rogan. The UFC's got some weird ownership.
I spoke to you before about identity politics, and we're talking about Jewish mobs, Italian mobs, and right now they're trying to pass the law. Anything that you say against Israel or Jewish or something has become anti-Semite, and obviously in any religion or in any kind of culture, there's always something that we can point to, but if, like you mentioned before, Rothschilds or somebody, they're not good people. So as, what's his name, George Soros, they're all Jews, but doesn't mean all Jews are in Israel are. They're still suffering, of course, at the same time as Russians and Ukrainians and everybody else. So, yeah, pretty much identity politics take over for our current society to pinpoint to people. So now, Candace Owen against Rabbi Shmuel, like you mentioned, they're like a big fight. But I personally listened to the entire interview, and there is not much wrong she said. Everything is right on, except they twisting it. So it's
Rabbi Shmuley makes it pretty easy, though.
Oh yeah, yeah. So that's kind of identity politics question. What's your stance for it? And another question I had also, CIA. I read somewhere that CIA actually was established after World War II, and the first agents were actually Nazis, who actually CIA, America hired them, so it was counter to Soviet.
Great questions. First question, excellent question. This is very contentious, but my belief is that it's not the Jews, it's not the Jewish thing that is the problem. It's the organized crime, the criminals, the human traffickers, the sex traffickers like Jeffrey Epstein and his network. That's a problem. Crime has organized around racial and religious identities for all of history. Because if you're going to commit a whole bunch of crimes, would you rather do it with someone who's from a different continent than you, that looks completely different than you, that speaks a different language than you, that you've never met, or with all of your homies that are from the same family as you? Right? You're obviously going to, like, if you're an Italian, you're obviously going to commit a bunch of crimes with other Italians because blood is the strongest tie that binds. And that's always been how organized crime has always worked all around the world for all of history. So it's not an accident that Jewish people do crime with other Jewish people. And Jewish people have been doing crime just like every other race has been doing crime for a very long time. They're just really good at it. Right? And other people are good at it too. But there's an important point here too to be made, that this anti-Semite smear gets thrown around in order to confuse the identity politics, in order to throw names and labels. And the problem, like the problem that can infect a religious group beyond organized crime is supremacism, right? And every religion, every race can become supremacist. And if a Jewish group is Jewish supremacist and they think Jews are better than everyone else and everyone else should be treated as less than Jews, that's a problem. And that will always be a problem for all of time, because that will never be able to merge with a modern society. It'll never be able to coexist alongside someone else. Just like Islamic supremacists, they're going to be a problem until the end of time. Just like any other supremacist group, right? We live in a world where there are billions of people everywhere and we need to get along. And so supremacism in any group doesn't work. It just is never going to work. But being proud of who you are, being proud of where you come from, being proud of your people, that's great. That's very healthy. That promotes diversity, because we need all of our different types of people to have their own identities and to be their own peoples and groups. So it's very complicated and it requires nuance. And the anti-Semite thing is designed to take away the nuance and to call you a Nazi and to smear you. So talking about Nazis, yes, the CIA hired a whole bunch of Nazis because communism was really whack, and communism had just murdered millions and millions and millions of Christians. And that's a whole other rabbit hole. But they realized pretty quickly that we got to stop this whole communism thing from coming down, and you Nazis have literally already been doing it. So we're just going to hire you. And they hired basically the whole Nazi secret service, like, to just stay in place and to maintain their SS establishment all across Europe, and it became known as Operation Gladio, and it is still to this day not really disclosed. And yeah, the CIA just hired a bunch of Nazis. They brought them over here to build our rockets, to make our chemical weapons, and they also hired them to stay over there and to, do Nazi stuff to anyone that seemed sketchy.
I'll add a tiny little bit to that. I would say, as a Christian, a Christian will know that they are a wretched sinner and that what they deserve is hell and separation from God and be punished for their sins. And so, if you're truly a Christian, you understand the only way to salvation is through God's Son Christ dying on the cross for your sins. You wake up every day and you should be in a state of like immense thankfulness and low view of yourself and a very high view of God. Now, if there's any Christians out there that are other than that, I would say investigate the crap out of those people is what I would say. And so if whatever religion it is, if there are people doing evil things, the correct thing to say is investigate those people to no end and expose their evil for the world to see. And that's what I would do if people were holding the Christian banner doing something evil. I would say investigate them.
Or the banner of any other religion.
All right. Hey, Ian, amazing work. What do you know about Brittany Murphy's death?
Brittany Murphy is a wild one. Brittany Murphy was briefly married to Ashton Kutcher. She has kind of a long history. She had kind of a very public eating disorder in Hollywood. And then she wound up marrying this one really weird dude. And they both got pneumonia. Kind of like this gal, and died very quickly and mysteriously. And it's not really, I dug into it a fair bit, but I didn't like go into like unknown sources. And it was not immediately apparent to me what they knew or what they found out or what they were going to expose or why they both got pneumonia. But it was weird. It's very weird. And I think that is probably a story that some people are currently taking to their graves. And I think there probably is a story there, but I don't know it.
How do you think the music industry will look once all this unravels and us young artists are coming into it? How do we avoid scheming with Live Nation being an unchecked monopoly?
Blockchain, baby. The era of blockchain music is here. And when it was like last year or a year before that this rapper realized like, oh, dude, I could offer my music on the blockchain. $1, you get the album, you get the NFT of the album. It's not replaceable. I can sell a million, I think it was 1 million copies. He sold out in like 5 minutes, and he sold $1 million worth of music in 5 minutes or something like that. And it was just like, boom. And then you never heard about him again, and you never heard from it again. And we all know why, because this whole establishment relies on people not taking power over their own music, on us not having citizen-owned systems of distribution that cut out all of these corrupt middlemen. But the era of blockchain is here, and there's going to be 1 million versions of that solution. But all the musicians out there, everyone that's got a project, everyone that's got an idea, if you're young, if you're talented, if you're engaged, you are at the right time in history to change the nature of creative industries, not just music, film, photo, art, all of it. Blockchain is changing all of it.
All right, from the 540 area code, Ian, wholeheartedly, what can you tell us to prepare for in the future?
Prepare for everything and anything. Every day of your life, you should wake up and try to be the best version of yourself, because you have no idea what's going to happen. And whether you're a parent now or you're not a parent yet, whether you're a brother or a sister, a son, a daughter, you should be your best self for yourself, for everyone around you, because you only get to live this life once. And maybe we're in for a golden age. Then you should maximize on that. You should be your best self for the golden age that you only get to live once. Maybe we're in for a really hard time. You should probably be your best self so that you don't die first. Whatever it is, you should be your best self. And that can start small, it can start simple, but you should probably do your best to do a little better tomorrow.
All right, here's our 17th question. Why did the establishment turn on Diddy?
Great question. There's lots of theories, and I'm not right by any means, but my belief is that he was way too sloppy, way too messy, and they had been protecting him for a very long time, and he was getting drunker and drunker and drunker on that power, as people that are into super evil satanic things tend to do. But I don't think they turned on him. So there's this belief in the tinfoil world that like everything is controlled, and that if we are finding out about Diddy, it's because they told us. No. That is getting rid of all of our power in this situation. What actually started the flood of Diddy lawsuits was a lawsuit by a woman who he had spent years beating, and then she was brave enough to go to a lawyer and to speak about it and to publish that lawsuit. And when the Cassie lawsuit dropped, they made the mistake of not settling it immediately, and it hit the internet for just a couple days before they settled it. It was long enough for everyone to see it. And that was long enough for everyone to realize, like, oh shit, if Diddy abused you, we're getting money. And suddenly dozens and dozens and dozens of women were like, money, please. Because he beat all kinds of women. He abused kids. He abused all sorts of people. And so it was a brave woman that spoke up that started everything. And once it had started, that's when they were like, we need to wash our hands of this. We need to get in between this. We need to run interference. Like, they didn't release it. They just started running for the hills once it started being released because they knew they couldn't lock it down.
Did you see the Diddy mugshot? It didn't really look like him to me. What you think?
It did not look like him to me. It looked like AI or like a different dude. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know if we're supposed to trust the plan or if like there's something else going on out there. But there's only so much I can control. So I just do what I can.
Do you think Trump is involved with this stuff in any way?
I don't know. I want to believe so. But it's so complicated, and I am but a lowly man. And I think that way too many people on the internet are way too sure of themselves to think that they're like some 4D chess player that can understand the whole world through their little Google searches. It's like, yeah, maybe, bro. I don't know. I certainly see evidence that he's speaking out about it. I see like he's openly publishing that he's going to go after child traffickers. There's a lot of evidence that he has something to do with it. I just read what I read. I see what I see. And tomorrow will maybe be a better day.
With the Diddy trial, there's 100+ plaintiffs. Do you think this is all going to be public?
No, I don't think it's all going to be public. I don't think that they're going to make all the videos public. I don't think that they're going to make all the trials public. I think a fair bit of it will probably be public. I'm not super experienced. I've not been doing this for ages. Like, I'm new to this. But I would guess that a lot of it will be sealed, a lot of it will be settled, a lot of it will be private, but I do expect that the Trump administration and the people in it are very interested in these proceedings and interested in utilizing it to cleanse the government of all of these corrupt individuals. And I'm not saying just Trump, I mean the other people in the Trump administration too. So whether or not it's public or private, I think we're going to get way more results than we're used to because this is not like Epstein, and the people that Epstein was blackmailing are no longer in control.
All right, 10 more minutes. Do you think this current disclosure will lead to the exposure of the Luciferianism and satanic rituals of the elite, including satanic ritual abuse?
I mean, if you really think about it, it already has, and it's already all over the internet. There are satanic ritual abuse survivors speaking openly about it all the time on the internet. And the problem is that people aren't listening. The problem is that people don't believe it. The problem is that it's too horrific to understand. The things that I talked about tonight are like Go-Gurt and sprinkles compared to what is actually happening to children all around our country and what is actually happening when you talk about satanic ritual abuse, and it's super dark. I am not hopeful that we're going to get a real exposure of the actual satanic cult that is up there somewhere. But I do think that it is going to start to collapse, and I think it's already collapsing. Whether or not everyone knows it collapses and is collapsing or not, like I'll take collapse without knowledge rather than more of what's been going on.
It's pretty clear that incredible team has informed behind Trump, but given Trump's ties to Roy Cohn.
Yeah, Roy Cohn.
And the history behind him and all the implications that come along with it, how much can we expect, or is this next level chess being played here?
It's 5D chess. This is one of my favorite things to talk about because people have really polarizing perspectives on Trump, and not enough people actually talk about Trump's history. It's either you have like this surface level view of Trump and he's evil or good, or you have this like he's a trafficker because he was friends with Epstein and he was raised by Roy Cohn, so he must be evil. But I don't hear enough people talking about why that might actually be a good thing. And let me explain. Roy Cohn was involved in those Blue Suite parties with the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, that I was talking about when the mob was blackmailing the FBI. Roy Cohn was instrumental to the formation of the American blackmail world back then in those days. Roy Cohn was a lawyer for the mob. He was a very sketchy dude. But he also was very close friends with Trump. And Trump called him many times, like daily, for a huge portion of his life. Trump talks about how Roy Cohn was like the dude when he was growing up, and he learned a lot of stuff from him. And then he went and he bought the Plaza Hotel. He overextended himself financially to buy the hotel where that blue suite where all the sexual blackmail happened was. He bought it. Then he went and bought the boat of Anand Khashoggi, this famous arms trafficker that had been trafficking weapons with Jeffrey Epstein. That this boat is famous for having a bunch of sexual blackmail cameras set up on it. He buys that boat too. He later sells them. So Trump has been involved in the sexual blackmail world in some way. He was very close friends with Jeffrey Epstein. And at first it's like, ooh, that's dark. That's not great. And I agree. That's dark. That's not great. But you look at Trump for real, and he doesn't drink, he doesn't do drugs, he doesn't smoke. So to me, that's evidence that he knows not to be blackmailed. Then you look at evidence of how he has grown over time. And sure, he used to party, he used to be like kind of rich and do his thing. Like maybe he used to be a lot more perverse than he is now. I'm not saying he was perverse. I'm saying, I don't know. But what he does now is he sure seems to love his wife now. And he sure seems to want to call out traffickers now. Epstein went down during his time. He famously kicked Epstein out of, well, it's controversial whether he actually kicked Epstein out of his resort the way they say, but clearly he cut ties with Epstein. And clearly he's not sad about doing something about all of this. And I suspect that Melania was introduced to him by Epstein, which Epstein directly alleges. I suspect that Melania may have been trafficked at some point earlier in her life. She was a model, right? Put two and two together. And so I suspect, this is just my theory, that she has been whispering in his ear the whole time they've been together. And their son is growing up, and Trump is thinking about what is my legacy. And he has a huge ego, right? If Trump is one thing, it is an ego. And if you're at that age and your wife that you love dearly has been whispering in your ear for 20 years now or whatever about how important it is to do something about this horrible world that she knows about, and you have one last chance to leave a legacy, that seems like a pretty great legacy to lead. So that is speculative, and I know it's very hopeful, but that seems like a pretty likely take on everything that I'm seeing today. And sure, he is also corrupted by money. Sure, he is also not perfect. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. But I'll take him over Kamala and the CIA any day.
Ian, what's your advice on how we as a society sever our obsession with celebrities and big brands that have the masses so captivated?
Homeschool your kids. Take your kids out of public school. Take them off their screens. It is up to all of us. It's up to you, parents out there. You have to do the work to homeschool your kids. And it's not that hard. All you need to do is not send them to public school, and you're already like plus 100% better. You don't even need to teach them anything. You could literally just leave them in an empty room with a bunch of books and lock the door and put food in there every couple hours, and they would be infinitely better off than going to school. Okay? Plus 5 points if you put 3 of them in a room together. Plus 5 points if you go in and have a conversation about the books they're reading every couple minutes, whatever. It's not that complicated, but it does require us to have the financial ability to do it. It requires the community support to help each other that can't afford to do it because, you have to go to work. But you'd be surprised how, right, a lot of homeschoolers in this room, and you'd be surprised how quickly it takes a couple years and your homeschool kid realizes, oh, I'm a real person that needs to take care of myself. And pretty soon you can leave them at home alone and they'll do their homework on their own because they realize that life is not about going to the school and checking the box that is actually just a prison where they're getting you ready for prison. Life is about being a person and having a brain. And when you get homeschooled, you learn that it's up to you. So homeschool your kids. There's a lot of other solutions, but homeschool your kids.
Thank you so much for all the work you do. I'm curious, if you experience challenge in getting this information out, it would seem that the elite would come after anyone who sheds light on this type of information. So I'm wondering how you stay safe, generally speaking.
I think I just stay ignorant and naive to the dangers. I'm pretty big, so they'd have to send someone big. And I've never been threatened. I've never been approached or attacked or anything like that. I'm a pretty nice guy, and I'm pretty good at de-escalating. I have been censored. I have been shadow banned. I have had channels taken down and demonetized and all that stuff. And I just got lucky enough that I blew up fast enough, mixture of luck and strategy, that I was able to make enough money that even despite those attempts, I'm really good at being poor. I've done it all my life. So I'm very good at just cruising around in my van with my dog and making do with what I've got. And so at this point, I am stable enough and diversified enough that come at me, like they're not gonna stop my finances. It's okay. And so I pretty much just say what I want, and that's been the point the whole time.
Why would Charles Manson go to prison for the CIA if he was working for the CIA? What has he publicly, or what did he publicly acknowledge about his relationship with the CIA, if anything?
This is a super interesting question that I don't have the answer to, and I'm excited to learn more about because I've not gone beyond like the start of the dig, because Tom's dig is so extensive and it's so deep, and I'm still finishing the book. My understanding is that Manson has never spoken about working for the CIA in any serious or direct way, which could indicate a couple of different things. Maybe split personality disorders, maybe he's a path, like maybe he doesn't know maybe he's being used by the CIA and they're sort of watching him do there's a million ways. It's hard to say exactly what it is, or maybe he's just taking it to his grave. I don't know. All I know is that there's tons of evidence that he was being protected by someone really high up in the government. And then when he did finally get caught, a whole bunch of weird spooks showed up to confuse the scene. So
when do the Beatles get involved?
They get involved before Manson. Actually, they were a part of his story, and they were a part of that whole Summer of Love era. And I have not done the dig on the Beatles yet. I'm a little nervous to do that. I'm going to make a lot of enemies when I do that. So Beatles night coming to a saloon near you soon.
Do you think any assassination attempts on Trump were MKUltra?
MKUltra, yes. Maybe. I don't know. The question is, do I think that any of the people that tried to kill Trump were sort of prepared individuals that had been MKUltra, so to speak, by drugs or by split personality disorder or by preparation of any sort in order to kind of like send them there to do it? And I have no evidence that did happen. Although I'm going to talk to George later because I know George did a lot of digging on that. But it is the kind of thing that I think everyone should be looking out for. Thomas Matthew Crooks was very suspicious and very weird. And we know that was that's the point of the Manchurian Candidate. That's the whole concept of the Manchurian Candidate. That is part of the purpose of mind control, is can you convince a regular random dude to go kill someone? And I think the answer is probably yes. And I think that you don't need to just look at Trump assassinations, but you also need to look at school shooters. And I'm not going to say anything more than that because we all know what happened to Alex Jones. But yeah, it's out there.
All right, next question. Why are so few people actually talking about these things, and how can we casually talk about this with friends, family without sounding insane? I'll start, and then you can answer after that. All right, so we need to be talking about these things, and we need to talk about them with people that we know and don't know often. One simple way you can do this, no matter where you are in the country, is put this video on after we're done editing, invite 5 family friends over, or 5 families over to your house, have a dinner, and then get the parents, around and watch this, and then actually have a discussion about it, and then pray for what needs to be prayed for at the end of that. That's the way to do this. If you are going to a church where you are not allowed to talk about these things in a life group, you should run from that church and find a church where you can actually talk about truth and investigate truth and pray for truth and be holding people accountable and shining light on evil and deception and making the world a better place, being involved and engaged.
Not trying to name any specific churches, just generally if you're involved in a church like that, maybe think about it. It's not fun to talk about this kind of stuff. It's uncomfortable. It's not great dinner conversation in the normal American culture that we live in. It should be, but it's not, because we live in a comfort culture where everyone has been taught to be comfortable all the time, and anything that makes you uncomfortable is hate speech. And so how do you actually bridge that gap? And if you watch my videos, I do it intentionally. It's with making it fun and humorous, and not making it some save the world, you need to understand. It's chill. Just chill out. Start with the McDonald's ice cream conspiracy theory. It's hilarious, right? It's crazy. And at first it's dude, do you know why all the McDonald's ice cream machines are broken? I learned the other day why. It's crazy. Check this out, right? And from there, you can start to have funny conversations. You can start to have fun conversations. It does not need to be There are 300,000 missing children that have been trafficked over the border and they're being sex slaves right now. It doesn't have to start there, even though that is true, right? You can make it fun. You can make it interesting. You can tailor these conversations to each different person you're talking to, because it's more important that we start talking about real things rather than like whatever celebrities tell us to talk about, than that we talk about the biggest thing first, right? So find ways to have a good time with it, even though it's super dark. That's what I do.
Few more minutes. Any truth to the connection with Podesta, Chester Bennington, Lincoln Park, Chris Cornell, Borden?
It's a wild rabbit hole. If you don't know, John Podesta is one of the most evil people on the planet, and this lead singer from Linkin Park looks exactly like him. And maybe he's his son. I don't know. I have no idea. But I find it unlikely. I find it unlikely, but I would also say it was unlikely that the president of the United States was utilizing a child sex trafficking ring, referring to Bill Clinton, in the White House. So who knows what's real at this point? I wouldn't put it past anyone.
So with all of these things coming to light kind of in rapid succession, I think my biggest question is, what's the big why behind it? Is it mass mind control of or mass world depopulation, or like what's the ultimate reason why?
Like, what's the reason why all the things exist, not why they're being
like
disclosed?
The
Totally.
motivation that they have.
I got you. And that's a great question. And I love answering it, because I think that too often people get steered into this tinfoil hat, like they control the world and they have this evil plan and they're trying to, like, yeah, maybe some of them might be. I don't know. And I really do mean some of them might be. But there's also a much simpler way to look at this. Imagine you are one of the biggest drug traffickers in the world. You sell cocaine, right? You have buddies that sell guns. You have buddies that sell kids. You have buddies that do all these black market things, right? And you make millions, billions of dollars doing your black market things, right? And over the decades, you've gotten richer and richer and richer because organized crime has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And you've gotten more and more friendly with all of the intelligence agencies that started partnering with you the literal day they were founded back in World War II. And that's not a joke. That's real. The CIA has been partnering with all these organized crime organizations all along, right? So is the FBI. And so when you have this whole side of the world that's built on black market money, they have certain incentives. Like, they have incentives to control the politicians that might come after them. They have incentives to control the regulators that might come after them, the law enforcement that might come after them, the people that might wake up and start looking at them, right? They are incentivized to keep that money flowing. And when the money is flowing more into the black markets than it is into the lit markets, suddenly the black market has more power than the front market. And that's how you wind up with the Jeffrey Epstein tapes getting taken by the US government. The most powerful agency, the most powerful empire in the world gets the tapes for a sexual child blackmail ring, and then they hide it. That is sure proof that the black market has more power than the light market, right? Because otherwise, we'd all have the tapes and they'd all be in jail. So what that means to me is that the people that are doing criminal things in our world have more power than the good guys. And when you have criminals that run the world like that, they're incentivized to demoralize culture, to create a more blackmailable culture by feeding in weird sexual perversions that when those people grow up, those make great blackmail material. They are incentivized to mess with our hormones so that we need medications, to mess with our minds so that we need medications, to create problems that are profit cycles. And more the black market are making friends with the corporate markets, with the corporate oligarchs, like the Pfizers of this world, like the General Mills of this world, that are, we're just committing little white collar crimes. We're not committing like, the Jeffrey Epstein crimes, but they're kind of all friends and they just happen to all go to the same islands and do the same things to the same kids. So slowly it has taken over our world and we wind up here where it's like literal hell on earth.
Have you listened to the Abraham Finkelstein interview, and do you think it is real or a hoax?
I have not. I don't know what that is.
I would like to have a discussion with you about the Christian faith. You mentioned you're new to it, but I believe you've been quickened in your inner man and bestowed with more wisdom and insight than people who've been in it for much longer. I believe it's because of grace himself, Jesus Christ, and his spirit poured onto you. I also believe it's because of your naivety, which is childlike and which Christ asks us to be in coming to him. Thankful for your spirit, from Olu.
Thank you, Olu. That's a great message. And I think you're right, Olu. And I think I've been looking for faith and morality my whole life. And I also think that Mark is helping a lot because Mark is one of the best Christian men you could ever find in this world. And he lives the principles. He doesn't just talk about the principles. And it was immediately apparent to me the first time I met him and his family. And if you haven't met him, try to do that sometime.
When will the edited version of this presentation be released and where? It'll be on X, and it will also be on Rumble, on the Old State Saloon Rumble. And then we'll also release little bits of it over time that we'll highlight as well.
I'm also kind of scheming on putting together a mega doc that is my 4 presentations from last time spliced with these 3 presentations from this time into like a 7-hour saga of sin and corruption that we can just like, when you need to have a really gnarly sick day, you can just bask in how horrible the world is from start to end. I'm scheming on that. So,
Ian, had another question.
what's up?
Well, so with regards to our president-elect, okay, I think we can all provide a pretty good succinct arguments to those radical leftists as to why they hate him, and we can deal with those. A number of my friends, there's a pretty big group of hardcore Christians who might fall in the group of abolitionists, if people are familiar with abortion abolitionists. These people feel that it was evil to vote for Trump, that and some of his policies, the people he's implemented, really are just against anything Christian. So, and I think coming from a bird's eye view that you've had of a lot of this, with regard to this man, and I want to add one more thing, is back in 2016 when they were talking to him, they had an interview about him being a Christian. They asked him about forgiveness. He said, "I don't need forgiveness." This stuck in the craw of a lot of Christians. Do you think he might have been speaking to some of this wickedness? Because, we know he speaks in code. Melania dresses in code. Do you think he might have been alluding to the fact that he's not involved in some of this? But also just the main question is, what would be your best answer as to really why we see the validity of this guy, that there is a nobleness here that we could stand behind?
I don't know. I mean, so I'm not a good person to judge people's Christianity, and I think that's a kind of a silly thing to pretend to be able to do, right? My understanding is that God is the one that can judge you of whether you're a Christian or not. But I've never seen Trump acting very Christian or professing very much Christian faith in any overt personal way, other than like the standard duties of commander-in-chief. I'm not sure. That doesn't sound super Christianly, but we also know that Trump is, shall we say, sometimes sloppy with his words. He riffs for hours on end. I try not to read too far into any of Trump's words, which I know not everyone agrees with, but I try to like read the meaning, not the actual like literal words. So I don't pay too much attention to, did he say this or that? Was this or that? And like, I don't think he's playing 5D chess with every word of his speeches. The dude is 70 years old. He's drinking Diet Coke 12 times a day. He's doing his best. He's got a hard job. I am not of the opinion that Trump is like some moral savior that is like the most heroic human ever. I don't think that he's uncorruptible or uncorrupted. I think that he has made some cabinet appointments that I am not excited about so far. I think he's made some that are amazing. And I think that a lot of what he's done is awesome. And the reason why I think that some people are behind him because they are totally behind him. Some people are behind him because he's not Kamala. And I think there's a huge number of people that are behind him just because it's hopeful to have hope again. It's hopeful to see a coalition of Americans. Even if Trump backstabs us, it's hopeful to see a coalition of Americans that are awake and aware and care again. Because that will go beyond Trump. That will live beyond Trump. That will live beyond this 4-year administration. That is a change in America. It is a unity party of Americans that the RFK Trump thing created, whether they like it or not. And so that's the part that is most exciting to me. I am holding out my judgment on these appointments, on what Trump is doing, on what exactly is happening, because as we know, it's really hard to read into Trump. It's really hard to read into the news these days, the day it comes out. So I'm kind of trying to be patient and just take it as it comes and remind myself every day that Kamala did not win. Thank goodness. The border is going to be closed. The human trafficking is going to be addressed in some form. The Doge is here, literally. Bitcoin is almost at 100,000. Like, Diddy's in jail. So there's a lot to be thankful for. Trump does not have to be like the perfect savior for us to be thankful for where we're at.
Hi, Ian. This is a two-part question or talk. There's a lot of information going around on the internet and that I've studied for quite a long time that, and I want to get your point on this, that Trump is not really acting alone. He's like the brand name for this movement of truth and exposing all these evil things in the world, and that he is supposedly part of a group called the Alliance, which has been stated to be a group that formed after JFK's assassination of 10 generals in the army who could see that a lot of the army was infiltrated with bad actors who had bad purposes for the army and were using it for that. So these generals supposedly created this whole plan to rid the United States of all the usurpers and people who'd infiltrated the United States and were posing as good guys. And supposedly this alliance was created, and they decided after all these many years, maybe 50 years of planning how to get the United States back as a republic and restore it, they needed a president. And so they supposedly selected Trump because he had enough money, he believed in their values, he wanted to get out of the human trafficking and clean up the United States. Have you heard of the alliance? And to me, it seems true because Trump is always in his speeches when he thanks people, he's always pretty humble and says, "Don't thank me, thank all these good people here." And he looks at the military who's behind him, and this kind of thing. And then my second part of this question, or this statement, and to get your point of view on, is that I did watch your video on how Trump was mentored by the blackmail guy who knew blackmailing. Now, I think that's very, very important because in many of these conspiracy truths that we've found, Trump went into many different countries, and these people that rule these countries kind of bowed to him and gave him power. He walked in front of their sword. He went to these countries and they honored him where they never did this with other presidents. They capitulated to him in a sense.
And they've been doing it again since he got reelected, before he's even back in office.
And so I'm thinking that his blackmail experience and learning from his mentor is being used here in sort of a good blackmail way. It's kind of like, hey, country over here, Saudi Arabia, we've got the goods on you. If you want to come clean, don't act with the bad actors, but act with the good people, or we'll kind of blackmail and tell on you. And I think he's done this in many countries. So it's not just Trump running this whole thing. He is the brand, and he's a good guy. But there is an alliance of many, many people that I have studied on the internet that I believe run behind him and support him. What are your views on this?
I have heard, and I do follow a little. This is another one where I do not pretend to be smart enough to know. Because I'm just not. I'm only a year and a half into this. I'm only 31 years old. I'm not some genius. And to pretend like I could decipher the 5D chess of the most powerful men in the world through the code that they're leaving on the internet is like, yeah, right. That's ridiculous. I'm not that smart. Some people probably are. If it's happening, some people probably are smart enough to decipher such a thing. But what I will say is that it's so fun to follow along with and watch, and I love it. When I love to make Q jokes, not because I want to make fun of Q because I think it's stupid, but because it's just so great and it's so cool. And like, if it's true, we're about to find out anyways. Like, we're about to find out, and that would be amazing. That'd be like the best possible outcome we could ever have. And if it's partly true, that's cool too. And regardless of whether it's true or not, like, trust the plan, bro, because it's hilarious and it's amazing. But I don't know. And I don't pretend to be smart enough to do the research to have like a strong opinion. But I follow lots of people that do have an opinion on it so that I can keep track of what's going on. Because I like to follow all various theories just so I'm aware of what people think.
Kelly Megan mentioned that we will hear from Epstein in person. So one question. Second question I have, since you mentioned about the trafficking, weapons and drugs and everything, all these cartels, it's all cash business. And US continue printing cash. Is that part of the kind of, I don't know, conspiracy or plan or whatever they do it together?
Good questions. The Megyn Kelly video you're referring to where she said, you're going to be hearing from Epstein very soon. We obviously haven't heard from him. But I remember someone asking either her or one of her close friends, like a Laura Logan, about that. And I think it might have been Laura Logan. I forget. And they said, like, it's a video of him that they believed was real, but had, so we'll see. But it's not, the claim was not Jeffrey Epstein's alive. It was, there's an unreleased video of Jeffrey Epstein, spilling something that maybe we'll see at some point here. Thanks for reminding me of that. I forget about that all the time. As for cash and the blackmail systems, yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're printing cash specifically to fund all these black market operations. I know they're printing cash because it makes them richer and us poorer because they have assets and we have money. And so our money gets worth less and their assets get worth more. But I also know that ever since that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies have come out, they have also been using cryptocurrencies to do all kinds of funny money stuff in the background. As well. So I don't think that crime relies on cash. They've got money laundering, they've got crypto, they've got whatever they need. They will always find a way. We take them down by taking them down. And that includes the banks and the Fed.
Last question from Dariana Everett in Montreal. Love these events and happy to have you guys. Happy that you're streaming them. Wish I could be there. As a singer, music producer myself, the talk was particularly interesting to me. Ian mentioned that he also did music. What type of music did you do? Can we listen to it anywhere? And what are your general thoughts about the future of music?
Yeah, I'm not going to tell the whole world where to go listen to my music right now. I'll think about it. I didn't produce a whole lot of music. I played piano when I was younger, and then that led to learning how to use like synthesizing equipment and make my own music online, because I also did a lot of spoken word, like poetry at open mics and stuff, and that turned into like kind of like making rap music in my sort of like 16 to 21 years of age. And I did a whole bunch of performances of like open mic style here and in Guatemala, where I was living frequently at the time. And I recorded some of that for fun. But I don't I never try to make money off it. I just think that music is amazing and it's a lot of fun. And having a musical instrument that you kind of are familiar with and like to check in with and just sort of like ground into from time to time is really healthy for people. I highly recommend doing it. I just wish that pianos were a little more portable. And was there another part to that question?
General thoughts about the future of music as we close.
I mean, music will always be around, and I'm really optimistic about blockchain and blockchain's ability to get rid of the middlemen and have us produce music that goes direct to consumer. But the unfortunate nature of music is that everyone wants music for free, and music is not free to create. And so that always will inherently lead to some sort of centralization or some sort of starving artist, and maybe something in between. And so I think that collectively as a culture, we're coming to this time where we have to realize that our money is being spent on what we value. And if we're not spending our money on something, we are allowing that to be devalued. And so this culture of not spending money on music is just emblematic of this desire to have things for free, to have things comfortable, to have things easy. But that makes it so that because we're not spending money on it, the artists are forced to engage with systems like this, because that's the only way they can make money. And so I think that we have to start investing in what we care about, so that what we care about cannot be taken and manipulated and perverted. So,
all right, how can people support you, Ian, and what you're doing?
Watching, sharing, talking about it, liking, commenting is huge, and I appreciate that. And it is free internet points that you can just give out with your thumbs, and it's super helpful. Please do that. If you want to support me in a monetary way, I have a website, cancelthisclothingcompany.com. I sell shirts on there. Don't order them right now. I'm having a huge problem with my shirt shipping company. But you can subscribe to me on my channels. You can donate to me through the apps. You can do whatever you want to support. I'm doing just fine though. Don't feel like you need to. I really appreciate any and all support. Mark, how can people support Old State Saloon?
Oldstatesaloon.com. Merch really helps. Plus you get a really cool shirt where people will wave at you and say hello, or they'll give you a middle finger.
Yeah, start the conversation. And if you're on X right now, if you're watching on X, because we're live streaming to my X feed, a great way to support Old State Saloon is just to subscribe to them on X, because Old State Saloon is making this possible. They host speakers just like me all the time. And if you are on X and you've enjoyed this talk, please go to Old State Saloon's X account. They're linked on here with me. They're linked in my profile right now, and subscribe to them. It's so simple for you to do. Just click follow, and it makes a huge difference for Mark, both in protecting him against people that come after him here, because that gives him more protection, more audience, more reach, but also because then you're going to get great content from all sorts of other cool speakers that come out here to talk in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ian. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. And thank you for
coming out.
everybody. Have a great evening.